Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Survivor Stockwatch podcast. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and tonight / today / whenever you're watching or listening to this, we will be talking about the finale of Survivor 43, and with me to talk about it is none other than the great Omar. How you doing, Omar?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I actually have some prior commitments, so I'm going to leave right now and leave you hanging. I Gablered you.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Sorry, peace. Just kidding. Can't wait to stock watch it up with you. I will not leave you hanging, but I might still Gabler you before the evening's up. We'll
You're
see.
not going to dip below the surface like an alligator?
I don't know how to swim, Taryn, so way to rub it in.
Though it would be an
Maybe if I
interesting
plug my nose.
podcasting. Maybe. Yeah, I think it would be an interesting podcasting strategy to come out strong and then try and fly under the radar in the middle of the podcast.
Right,
And then at the
right.
end of the podcast be like, gotcha.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
was actually the best.
is that what a 5-star Google review is worth, though? I don't know.
Maybe.
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
listeners and or watchers, tell us. Do you want to
Yeah.
see some alligator content podcasting wise?
All right. Well, think about it, and I'm willing to do whatever.
All right. Well, this is, of course, the podcast where we are going to rate the players based on how well we think they are doing in the game or how well they did in the game in this case, based, of course, on the edit and what little we can glean from some of the players after the fact. Although, who knows? People lie all the time, right, Omar?
All the time. I mean, I played a very honest game, so I don't know what that's about, but
Of
other
course, of
people
course.
are lying all the time. And I didn't, okay, so I did obviously watch the stock watch for Survivor 42, but I don't know what it is. I maybe didn't listen to the finale one. I don't know why. There's no particular reason why that I would maybe stop
Yeah, I don't
watching.
know why you would want to do that. I mean, I feel
Right at
like
that
you'd
point.
want to hear me give you a rating for how you were voted out, right? Like that's.
I did listen to that rating. The one after I had a little bit less interest in it, but I don't know why.
Oh, I see.
But it's like almost as if this one is like the finale episode's an interesting stock watch because it's basically a cheat sheet. Like you know what
Yes.
happens.
Yeah, so it's kind of less so the predictive kind of rating and more so the kind of like how well did they do? And
Hmm.
in relation to a finale performance, and perhaps in the winner's case, just a winner's performance. How do we rate the winner, which should be quite an interesting one. I feel like since I've been doing the Survivor Stockwatch and doing it in this format where I've been rating the winners, we have not gotten great winner edits in the sense of like
No.
certainly Erica. It was like it was so hard to properly ascertain like what she was doing because she was so absent from the edit. Marianne had a more visible edit, but and probably was the easiest to rate. But still had like a less kind of typical game where she kind of like broke some molds. And now talking about
You
broken molds.
this wasn't straightforward for you? So like it's almost as if Erica and Marianne had a baby and that was Gabler's edit.
Yeah,
Truly.
it truly is. Yeah, I think that's where we are. I guess I will say right off the bat, I think there were many instances during this podcast where I said that I did not see Gabler winning, and that and I think to be fair to myself, I did also say, and I could be wrong, and if so, congrats to Gabler. I'm totally wrong about this. So with that in mind, I was totally wrong about this. I did
Oh
not see this
yeah,
coming.
yeah. I mean, very much to the end. I think I texted so 3 or 4 questions, maybe 2 or 3 questions into the final tribal. I texted Kevin Jacobs and I said, "Is Gabler gonna win?" Question mark. And then he said, "No,
Yeah.
just no, no punctuation, no follow up." Well, a few minutes later, he said, "Well, if he does, Twitter will explode." And that's actually what ended Twitter. It's not Elon
Mm.
Musk. It was Gablering Survivor. He Gablered Twitter for sure. But yeah, I think you know what I will say that no matter we'll get into the Gabler of it all, but I do think that this is actually kind of something that Survivor needs from time to time. Is something that is so controversial that, but not in a bad way, but controversial in a way that it sparks debate and question. And the Michelle winning go wrong, Gabler winning Survivor 43. These are moments where Chris Underwood winning season 38. It creates a bit of buzz, a bit of stir, whereas a more straightforward winner doesn't necessarily do that, and it keeps the show interesting, I think.
Well, to quote the great movie Vanilla Sky, the sweet ain't as sweet without the sour.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm pretty much a philosopher.
okay,
Um,
perfect. I've never seen that movie, nor will I now, but
oh well,
thanks
you
thanks for
should.
spoiling it.
It's got Tom Cruise, it's got Penelope Cruz, and those are all of the cruises. But
I don't
still.
know if the first one was a selling point.
um no, yeah, I'm with you. Like I'm down for disappointing finishes because certainly I'm used to
Oh,
it
I mean,
with
I didn't say that. That was your
well,
words.
this is what are you gonna do? I think it's good to not always get your way. I think that's one of the reasons why the show is so long lived, because
Yes.
there have been other reality shows and they tend to be the kinds of reality shows where you vote for a winner, and if you vote for a winner, you're always going to be, to a degree, like the majority is always going to be satisfied, right? Because
Yeah.
the majority
Yeah.
always gets their way. Um,
Yeah.
which I think in some ways, at least for me, it leaves me even more cold when I don't get. I just like, not only did I not get my way, but it's because everybody disagrees with me, um,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
which is annoying. But I
Yeah.
think you need to have moments where it doesn't go the way you want in order
Mhm.
for it to feel as rewarding when you do get what you want. And I think
Yeah.
that's what sells the longevity of the show. That said, I do still have some issues with the editing of the season as a whole.
Interesting.
I feel like I still wish that, like, yeah, they got me, they surprised me,
Mhm.
but I'm not watching Survivor to be surprised. I can be disappointed without being surprised. Like, I would much rather have felt like I more properly understood the structure of the season strategically and like
Mhm.
how it played out than be like totally bamboozled in the end. And to be fair, I think that, Island, or which was it? Chris Underwood season,
Edge of Extinction.
Edge of Extinction. I did kind of like the novelty of how surprising that was.
Mhm.
Um, but I feel like, yeah, that one got me. I don't need another one, especially this soon, that is so out of left field and I think, to be fair to some people as well, some people did see this coming. I think there were some people that were like,
Yeah.
no, I'm telling you,
The
Gabler,
truthers out there.
the Gabler truthers.
Okay, so I will. Okay, should I challenge you on that, even though it's your
Challenge
podcast?
me. Yes,
Okay,
please.
so I guess my question for you then is this surprise Gabler win, is that something that is truly because the edit misled us or left some
Mm,
stuff out, or is it based on all of our perceptions that are largely based on survivor history of that Gabler type archetype who often is a goat? Is it our own encyclopedia knowledge of history and our own perception of what he was, which may not have been what he actually was, that is the surprising part? Because I will say that, have you seen Saw?
yes.
Okay, so at the end of every Saw movie, there's like this
Mm.
moment of reveal. The music intensifies, and then you kind of go back and reveal, oh, hey, Amanda's really in on it. Spoiler alert. And hey, Gabler really is gonna win. And now I did something, like I was thinking back in my mind, but the Rolodex of memories were coming back, flashing before my very eyes when he won, thinking, oh man, there were moments in the edit where it was so obvious, I'm hiding in plain sight. You were, and nobody, it was so ridiculous in OTT that nobody believed it, but it was right there. Like he had the I'm fooling Ellie storyline. He explained to him to the audience how and why he wanted Ellie gone and Ellie left. So I feel like, at least for me, the surprise less so came from the edit, and it made like a lot of sense in hindsight, like all the things that we had seen. Where what did surprise me is that usually a player like Gabler, at least the way they came across, is not someone that the jury will ever hear out or vote for.
Hmm.
And we had this perception that he didn't know how to perceive himself, and that you always hear that player say, "I'll get to the end, I'll explain," like Philip Shepard.
Hmm.
But Philip Shepard lacked self-awareness of how he came across, and I think that's all what we thought Gabler was too, but it didn't turn out to be that way. And is that on our misread, or is it truly on the edit?
Well, so that's the thing I was thinking about the most was like what because it felt to me like I was missing something in Gabler's edit. And when I was thinking about it, I think the thing that I missed the most was that we heard a lot of Gabler, talking. It's I'm the Ala Gabler. He is the guy that is hiding in plain sight. We heard a lot of Gabler talking in confessional about what he was doing, but we never really heard from anybody else
Mhm.
on the cast about how they felt about Gabler beyond just like, yeah, we don't really respect the guy. And so when the jury comes in and out of nowhere, they're all kind of like, Gabler, yeah, you kind of rocked it. I feel like there's a big disconnect for me of like, wait, how did you
Mhm.
go from there to here? And like, where is that? Where did that happen? And I wish that I had seen more of that along the way. And it's possible that that never existed on the island and it only happened in the jury. And maybe that's part of it. But it's still the story for me is lacking in that regard. And then the other thing is the thing that I've been talking about throughout the season, which is that like, okay, but why did we need to be so like obscure about like the strategic maneuverings throughout the
Right.
game? Like it, because like overall, and this is not including Gabler at all, but like just from the merge, it just felt like things were happening. We were talking about this. It felt
Mhm.
like Brant Steele, and the end kind of feels like a Brant Steele too.
Yes.
Um, where it's just like, why are things happening and all of that stuff? And I thought for a while it was because they were trying to obscure like a pagonging, like something that
Right.
otherwise would be boring if they told us what was really happening.
Right.
And now it almost feels like they were just trying to like be like, well, this is ultimately Gabler's story, so it doesn't really matter what was happening elsewhere.
Right, right. No, that's fair. But I think a lot of the negatives. So what was kind of interesting is I went on the know-it-alls a few weeks ago, and I thought that at that time there was like a lot of similarities, and not in a bad way at all. I think I said that at the time too, like don't take this the wrong way, but it's like I see that a lot of similarities in the positions of Gabler and Marianne, in that they, both early on pre-merge, they both had moments where other tribe members were talking poorly about them based on their larger than life personalities. And maybe it took some adjusting to get fully into the game properly, but kind of there, but if you get distracted by that personality and forget that they really still to some degree understand the game in Gabler's case, and definitely for sure is a student of the game in Marianne's case, you can easily, like, if they slip into that role where they're not seen as threatening because they have these big personalities, then you can forget that they are capable of more. And I think that that
Yeah.
is what happened. It's just he didn't have a big flashy move like Marianne did that was very easy to tell story wise that got her the win. And he didn't really have the equivalent. His was earlier on when Ellie left, I guess.
Well, yeah. See, I think that, and I think that's the main thing, right? Like, one of the reasons, at least for me, that I looked at Gabler's game and I said, like, okay, like this is all well and good, but none of it matters unless you can convince people to vote for you at the end. Because
Mhm.
ultimately, the game of like, I'm a goofball, I'm not a threat, you can work with me is, it's one that anybody can play until they have to turn it around, right? And it's
Yeah.
the turning it around that is the difficult part of playing that game. And it's why it's never really worked out very well. Um, and I wouldn't say that Marianne's was too similar, but I think yeah, she did have a similar kind of like coming out at the end where she convinced
Yeah.
people, and that was very easy to follow. I think it was like
Yeah.
everybody was able to see Marianne take control, flip
Yep.
perception, and like really make sure that people understood that she was playing the game. Whereas from my perspective, to the end, like I saw Gabler confident at Final Tribal,
Yeah.
But even just like listening to what he was saying, I was like, you're still not telling me anything different than what I already thought.
Right.
And you know, I was watching live on Twitch and I was thinking like, you know, I was thinking, you know, I like his performance, especially in contrast to some of the other, like there were some mistakes from Cass, there's some mistakes from
Mhm.
Owen. Um, but I still was like, I think it's possible that I could find myself voting for Gabler, but I would need to hear a lot more. So maybe if I was on the jury and I was really pressing him for those answers, maybe he'd give them to me. But like when people ask him, like, oh, would you have gone to the end with Cody and Jesse? And he kind of like dodges the question, I'd be like, okay, that's an automatic no for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
And I think that was the biggest thing that I wanted to know from him was like, if you are going to be that kind of guy that is on the periphery of you're kind of in every alliance, but you're not like the kingmaker and or you're not the driving force behind any of them, then what is your plan to remove the people that are ahead of you? Like, obviously Marianne had a very clear directive on how she got rid of me and Lindsay and eventually Jonathan, but which were all her tribe mates. But like, what was Gabler's plan to get rid of Cody and Jesse? Did it kind of just fall into his lap, or was there an intention behind that? And I think that for me is still unclear. And
yeah.
I read an interview from him, and I didn't really see that asked. But have you heard anything to give you some
So
enlightenment onto that?
I mean, it's always tough to gauge. I've heard that he has indicated that he would have been willing to go to the end with Jesse and Cody. Um, but you know, how true could that is that
Right,
really? Like at this point, it might behoove him to lie about that.
right,
So you know, who knows? But honestly, like I think it's a pretty easy just no. Like, of course, I wouldn't go to the end with them. We did see in the episodes, or at least it felt like we saw that he was indicating that he wouldn't have gone to the end with him.
right,
I mean, he certainly was trying to break them up, and he was talking to people about targeting them at some point.
right.
But it's again, it just like um like I feel like the narrative for me is just still missing that piece
Mhm.
of like getting from point A to point C. I want
Yes,
that B.
yes, yes. And I think the whole thing is very fascinating because this is not something that happens every day. But I do really like so okay, I mean obviously we don't know everything that happened, especially, everything that happens in the jury house and all that, that like it's all left off of the table. But what I do like is that, I went into this thinking that nobody's ever going to listen to Gabler and say, oh, I thought they would all disregard him as like, you didn't have your own agency, you just did what we told you to do, which is something that's very easy to do, but I don't think that's necessarily fair. And I don't think that's fair for anybody, not just Gabler. Like that would also be true for Cassidy. And I think that sometimes her agency was taken away from her a little bit as well when she's trying to say, it makes no sense for me to go to fire. But then people are telling her, like, you should have done that and it was a bad choice. When I don't really think that that's entirely fair. But for Gabler specifically, like he's somebody I thought nobody would ever even listen to for 5 minutes. And people like him, people like in our season Romeo, I did go into Final Tribal wondering if people were even going to listen to what he had to say. But there was a few people at the jury house for us that were like arguing for Romeo to win. And I think that no matter how you feel about anybody in the final three, they all got there and they all have information that you as a juror do not have. And so I think that in an optimal world, every juror should go in with an open mind to every case. That being said, it doesn't mean that every candidate will have an equal chance of getting your vote. But I think that being open to all of them is something that I appreciated that they were for Gabler. Now, if they did that at the expense of not being open to Owen or Cassidy, I mean, I can't really speak on that because I don't know, but it's like, and Owen and Cassidy's games resonated with me more as a fan as opposed to
Mhm.
somebody like Gabler's. So I assume that they got a chance, but I mean, I don't know for sure. But I think that I did like that. I thought Gabler would be completely disregarded, and I like that he wasn't disregarded completely.
Yeah, and I think that the most that the show tries to explain this to us in terms of Gabler's win, like the most that is there contextually is fire making.
Mhm.
That there's this big decision about fire making. It's played up like this. It's this big dramatic decision. Cass has to defend herself about her decision. We get shots from the jury talking about how important it is. In fact, that there's a moment where, you know, Jesse's like, hey, you should come in and face me yourself. And we get a shot of like Noelle, like, yeah, you should absolutely do
Mhm.
that. And then she's even asked about it later. And from what I've seen in some of the post game interviews, that is cited pretty heavily as one of the main reasons, seemingly, that that votes start to go in the way of Gabler. And this might genuinely just be the answer. And I feel like half of this podcast tends to just be like trying to solve the puzzle. Like, well, they showed us this like very obvious thing, but is that really the truth?
Right.
Um, because it seems so absurd that you'd be like,
Yes.
okay, well, I'm gonna like change my entire voting strategy for who I'm gonna vote for to Gabler because he made fire
Yeah.
against Jesse. It's possible that that's just the case, and that there was basically no other footage to show us. In which case, I
Yeah.
definitely let the producers off the hook in that regard. I'd still
Mhm.
wish for more solidly and clearly edited, individual episodes along the way. But if that's the case, I think there's a huge discussion to be had, and I think it's probably being had about what that even means
Yeah.
for both Gabler's game and for the game at large. Like,
Yeah.
do you have to go and make fire against the player in order to win the game? And if you give it to somebody else, are they going to win? Is kind of an important thing to consider.
Yes, I agree, and I think that this has sparked a lot of discussion, which I think is, finally worth having. It's been so many seasons since we've had this fire making twist, and personally, I've never really been a fan of that. I think it actually makes the game easier as a cop out in some ways because I just remember, strategizing my way, and I obviously didn't make it to the final four, but I also remembered being like, it only matters to get to four. Like, you don't need to maneuver your
Mhm.
way within your alliance to be in the top two of that alliance. You don't really need to even have a top three anymore. You just need to get to the four because that's all you need to do. And it makes it very easy to like lock in a game plan and not have to maneuver your way to the top. Like, could you imagine being Tony, who could just get into four and be fine, rather than having to work Woo over like later on to get into the top two? So I think that I don't like that because I think it takes the game away. I think it reduces gameplay. It makes it a bit more simple. And I don't find it to like your moments of fire are very fun to watch when it's a 2-2 tie, but it doesn't necessarily happen every season. But that's just my opinion. I think that is a popular opinion of many fans. But I also think that it is worth discussing because it really depends on the culture of your season. Like for season 42, nobody gave two shits about the fire making challenge, like about who would win. It was more about, in that moment, Romeo has the power. Is Romeo going to make the best decision for him or not? And then it's going to be okay, well, he took Marianne, which we perceive to be the wrong decision. Did Marianne have agency in that or not? To kind of be brought along, even though she shouldn't have been. And then in terms of like Mike versus Jonathan, like many people were thinking about voting for Mike, but none of them were thinking of voting for Mike because he won fire. Like we
Mm.
absolutely did not care about that. Whereas obviously this season is a lot different on paper. And I don't really agree with personally like the mentality that Cassidy must give up immunity for this because everybody gave Eric Reichenbach such a hard time for giving up immunity, and Brandon Hance gave up immunity, and then now this is something that has to be done. Like, if you look at Cassidy's position in the four, what is the priority? Because Owen, her, and Gabler are more on a level playing field than Jesse. Jesse's clearly the best player of the season, and if any of them have a chance to win, then Jesse has to go. So, what's the best way for Cassidy to get Jesse to go? Like, it's
It's
to put in Gabler. So, and that's what she did. And
mhm.
Gabler's a passenger in that situation. Like, he's just getting put in and he has no choice but to make a fire. Like, I don't think that's a move for him at all, personally.
I completely agree. I mean, they're expecting you to make a suboptimal move in many ways. For Cass
Yeah.
to drop immunity and make fire when she's the worst fire maker gives Jesse the best chance of surviving to 3, which means an automatic loss for her no matter what. On top
Yes.
of the fact that she is now in danger of not even making it to final tribal
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
It's objectively, a bad decision outside of how the
Hmm.
jury sees it, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but you do have to consider how the jury sees it. And I think it's important to note that, right? Because you can talk to death that this is not the right way for things to go. But at the end of the day, Survivor has always been this way. The jury is not always going to see things the way that you do. Um, and
Mhm.
and I think that like, so I watch these episodes on Twitch, and I definitely saw in my chat as Jesse, was in this predicament, people were emotional about it. People were
Yeah.
like really scared for Jesse. They really wanted him to pull through. And when
Yeah.
he failed, they were really upset. A lot of people were like, I don't even want to watch the rest of this. People were
Yeah.
really upset about it. And I think a huge part of that was that, I mean, really edited up
Yes.
like
Yeah.
this was dramatic.
Yeah.
But I think that that is reflective of how the jury seemed to feel based on what the edit was
Yeah.
showing us, at least many of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to note, because if you're in the jury and you really also want Jesse to win, and Jesse's sitting there at Tribal saying, well, I think the right move for Cass is to drop immunity and face me and
Yeah.
fire herself. And
Yeah.
you know that that gives him the best chance of staying. And he knows that
Yeah.
that gives him the best chance of staying. You're like, yeah, that should happen. And Cass is like,
Yeah.
no, I don't want to do that. You're like, well, then you're not doing the best move, you coward. And you
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
punish them for not doing what you want them to do, right? It gives them
Yeah.
this weird incentive. And Survivor is guilty of this in, I think, a couple of ways. Extinction Island being another one of them, where it's like, of course you're going to be inclined to vote for somebody that was on Extinction with you. You got all that time to not only bond with
Mhm.
you, but you can imagine yourself in that position. If you're
Yeah.
unwilling to vote for somebody that came back from Extinction, then you have to admit that you shouldn't be voted for if you came back from Extinction.
Right.
Which is
Yeah.
another motive that the audience is not going to be able to relate to as much. And so the dissonance is going to be created there. And
Mhm.
I think that's part of what happened here as well. For as much as the audience might have been annoyed at Cass in that moment, if they
Mhm.
were, at the end of the day, they're a bit more removed from it, and they're going to be like, well, I mean, ultimately, they should still vote for her. Whereas the jury
Yeah.
seems to have really stuck to their guns and been like, hey, no, she should have gone in and made fire if she wanted to win
Yeah.
the game, which is a weird call.
It is a weird call, and I think the other thing too, it's really hard to predict. Like there is the notion of jury management is obviously very important. It's the whole crux of the game, but I think there's also a lot of sentiment that I've seen of people easily disregarding jury management, easily disregarding a misread of jury management as being a bad player,
Mm,
but it is impossible to know how you or anybody is going to react when they leave the game. And branding can be very different from when you're in the game until when you're out, in terms of how even I didn't know how I would react. I thought I'd be pretty mad, and I ended up not being mad, but like I didn't know that that was going to happen. And so it's like sometimes there's the general rule of like don't be a jerk. So like someone like Russell was obviously not very nice to the people leaving the game, and people were very upset with him, and a lot of that had to do with his social game. But sometimes when you have people leave the game, you really don't know how they're going to react at all, like, and you don't have any basis or feedback to determine that any further. And so it can be a little bit of a crapshoot to some extent on what's going to be important to them and why and when it's going to be important. And when Cassidy's making this decision at Final Four, she has no feedback from the jury at all in what they're looking for. And from personal experience, sometimes what you hear in the game is very different than what a juror thinks out of the game. And so it's also possible nobody ever said, oh, it's really important to make fire, before
yep.
they left the game and were sitting on the jury. And I think probably what's underestimated in all of the stuff that has been kind of on the show, as well as the outcome, is the social game is probably just the most important thing. And I think that ultimately people are going to find a reason to vote for whoever they want to vote for. And I think that Gabler's social game was also probably not highlighted very well on the show, because people clearly liked him a lot more than everybody else thought that they did. And so I think that that is probably the biggest under edited part of his game that I saw, or that I assume was there. But it's also
Mhm.
very kind of hard to show a social game. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but
I mean, yeah, and that's again where like I wish that we had heard from other players how they felt about Gabler in the game. Where like when we're hearing Jesse and Cody talk about roping and Gabler, like you get the sense that they're doing it because they see him as a goat, not because they're like best buds, you know? And when, you know, when Gabler's talking to Owen or when Gabler's talking to Carla, like my read on those conversations is that those people are just kind of like, all right,
Placating,
sure,
yeah.
Gabler. And I never heard from anybody in confessional or really even in the context of the show itself, like conversations on the beach felt like people were really looking at Gabler as an equal, as somebody that they were like good friends with and wanted to work
Mhm,
deeply with because they felt like they you know that it was a good thing to work with him. I mostly just got people talking about
mhm,
either directly talking about or sort of indirectly through the conversations appearing to be just kind of like, yeah, I mean, you're not a threat, so I'm not gonna target you.
mhm.
But like,
Right.
you know, so so that's like that's the tricky part for me again with the editing and and then again it's like okay, so then they talk about fire, so like should we try to find these social bonds that created this fire thing, or is it
Mhm,
can we just point at like, well, they wished that it was Jesse and then you know because it wasn't, they went this way. You know, it's all of that stuff feels missing to me in terms of like
mhm.
solving that mystery, so it's again very difficult to figure out Gabler's win, especially when you do ultimately have like at least a couple of dissenting opinions in the
Yeah,
postseason and on the island itself.
yeah.
In terms of like,
Mhm.
you know, yeah, well, apparently, like some people felt like Gabler was just rambling on for hours at Final Try, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
So
it also is like, this season made it very clear like you must basically go to fire if you're gonna win. And other seasons though, again, like ours was not like that at all. 41's was not like that at all. Like the person who got taken to the end is the one who won
mhm.
in the last two seasons. So now we've had, since season 35, we've had different outcomes in terms of like the immunity winner has won, the person who got taken has won, and the person who beat the other person in fire has won. And I think it just shows like there is no one way to do it. So people should be like open to like looking at the situation and what the best move was in that moment because all three positions have won the game.
And I think what you said about like not knowing what the jury thinks is huge. Like if you're sitting there and you have no idea whether or not the jury is going to need you to make fire or not, why would you ever roll the dice on the considerably less safe option
And the
when
opposite could
for all
happen.
yeah, when for all you know, like they won't care at all, or even worse, they might think
They
you're an
think you're
idiot.
stupid. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like I think
So
honestly, if I had been sitting there just based on what I watched, I thought Cassidy would have been dumb if she had done that. It didn't make
yeah,
any
me too.
sense.
I would have been like,
Um,
you're out of your mind. What are you thinking?
yeah,
I would have been like, you just got tricked into doing something that was completely
yeah,
suboptimal for your game.
yeah.
You know, I think that's the jury wanted her to be tricked into doing something that was so they were
Yeah.
so and because we see
Yeah.
that and I say that because I see that all the time on Big Brother, because you on
Yes.
Big Brother you
Yes.
get to watch the live feeds, you get to see these things
Yeah.
happening in real time, and you will see that players will concoct a scenario that is good
Mhm.
for them but not good for another person, and they will convince themselves that it's
That it's
good
good
for
for
the other
them. Yeah.
person, even
Yeah.
though it's clearly not, because they know that
Yeah.
it's also good for them, and they will genuinely get mad and upset with the person if they don't agree with their false like
Yeah.
convinced you know argument.
Yeah.
And
That is
so
super annoying to watch on Big Brother, I have to say.
yes. um, so, but again, at the end of the day, the jury dictates what the truth
Yeah.
is, and
Yeah.
so I think the true important lesson to learn from this season would be make sure that you're having those kinds of conversations well ahead of time. Like
Yeah.
talk about season 43. Hey, you remember when the jury voted for Gabler because he made fire and Cass didn't drop immunity
Yeah.
for it? How do we
Yeah.
feel about that? Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I mean, yes, and I know. I feel like it's yes that I think if you put a word to it and you ask somebody like, "How do you feel?" and they
Yeah,
clearly
right.
state it, it's harder to kind of go back on that. But I also feel that people just change their minds when they get voted out
Mhm.
and they don't really. I feel like it's very inconsistent and difficult, and I think it
Yeah.
is the conversation too as well. Like, I think what's interesting about this whole situation with Gabler is that I actually do kind of see why he won. But I also can see reasons that Cassidy or Owen could win too. Like I think it was
Mhm.
a very open, they all had different strengths and they all played different games. And so it's like who could sell their particular type of game the best. And I think that, for what we saw, at least Gabler sold his type of gameplay pretty well. Whereas obviously the type of gameplay that Cassidy was trying to sell for herself wasn't necessarily perceived that way by members of the jury. Clearly, the most obvious example being I got Ryan out of the game, when that wasn't the perception of the other players, and because it wasn't really in line with what we saw on the show either. And so I think that it's interesting because they all did play very different games, and I can kind of see why he won. I can also see why people are upset that he won too. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, which also makes it very interesting for debate.
I do think it's really interesting to look at the different tactics involved in the final tribal performances, because I do think that, again, while I wasn't swayed as an audience member watching Gabler's jury performance because I was looking for something more specific, I do think that his tactic in general is something that I usually look for, especially for a player like him, where the more specific you get, the more likely you are to step on a landmine. And so if you can be vague and they're eating it, they're accepting it, like, continue to be vague, because as we saw with Cass, if you start to get more specific and you're wrong, like that can kill all kinds of momentum. So, being vague and being confidently vague, and the things that you're claiming are things that either can't be disproven or are things that if people are inclined can be like, yeah, that's true enough. Then you're going to be okay. So even if Gabler didn't necessarily play the game he thought he did, or maybe he came close to it, but not all the way there, I think his performance allowed the jury to vote for him regardless. Whereas Cass was in a spot, and this is the thing, I do feel like a lot of winners are in this spot. I think I've seen this a lot on Survivor. I've seen it a lot on Big Brother. Winners can win off of a game that they don't sell, if that makes sense. They think that they played one kind of game, but they actually played a pretty good other kind of game. And at Final Tribal, they try to be like, yeah, I was the mob boss. I called all these shots. And that's not really true. And if the jury likes them enough, they'll probably just be like, sure, that's fine. We like you a lot, though. So we're going to vote for you. And I feel like Cass was in that spot. And it's a spot where a lot of people, again, still win anyway. But in this situation, they were like, no, you're not going to get away with any of that because we're not inclined to vote for you. So if you try to claim a move, we're not going to let you have it, especially because this is a jury full of big threats that were taken out for being big threats. And I think they want to have ownership of those moves. And I think they want to reward a player that is not trying to take ownership of anything that they could have conceivably done. I think that's another reason why Gabler appealed to them.
Yeah, and I think that, for Cassidy's game, it was pretty good. And I think that if you could sell, I didn't want to be as good as all of you because then I would be sitting where you are because the biggest target is the one that goes home, until I got to a point where I can make it to the end. And I think that she had a good argument to win, but she didn't give the argument that the jury was kind of looking for. And it's also I want to be clear that it's hard to also be in that moment. You have your own thought of what your game was the whole time, and then within a matter of an hour you have to figure out exactly what they want and pivot. I think that can be difficult, and so if you're already not giving them what they're looking for, I think to figure that out and pivot is hard. And I saw that firsthand with Mike as well.
I was thinking Mike.
Mike thought he had an idea of what his game was, and when he was met with some resistance towards that, I think it took him by a big surprise, and he didn't really, and he didn't know how to react to that. And I think, now being well nourished, well fed, he can, clearly see, oh, that's what you were going for, and know that now. But in the moment, I think that surprise and then being so deprived was a recipe for him to kind of shut down instead of fight back.
Yeah, and that's another perfect example. Mike, who played, to my memory at least, a pretty decent cutthroat kind of game, but you saw himself as kind of the hero, the honest hero, and tried to sell that game. And then that that's a brick wall. That one is a lot harder of a sell than the other way around, where you were kind of a hero but think you were maybe more of a villain. And then you have Owen, who I thought had a pretty decent performance,
Mm.
actually. I think the things he was saying were pretty good. He was very honest, very
Yeah.
analytical about his game, you know, willing to throw out his faults in the game, but also some
Hmm.
of his strengths and how he
Hmm.
persevered, which was a large part of what I was looking for from his
Hmm.
Final Tribal performance. But I think for me, the thing that was missing from Owen's Final Tribal performance, and it's something that he talked about in the reunion after, it was that self-confidence of feeling
Yes.
like
Yeah.
I deserve this. Like
Yeah.
here's my case, and also that means I should win.
Yeah.
And it's something that I talked about a few weeks ago, where when Owen was saying I feel like I might not have the ability to win this game, where I was like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't sell myself so short because I've seen plenty of people in this spot win,
Yeah.
and it comes from having a passionate speech at the
Yes.
end talking
Yes.
about like, you know, I've been a super fan my whole life.
Yeah.
I've been waiting to play this game for, you know, however, like 20 years.
Yeah.
And I got here and it all went terribly wrong for me.
Yeah.
And every
Yeah.
single round, I found myself out of the vote and I struggled to survive. Round
Yeah.
after round, I got targeted. I had to win immunities. And this was not the game that I came to play. But man, I survived it all. And I am here
Mhm.
right now to tell you that I made it to the final tribal. If the 5-year-old me could see me sitting here right now, my mind would be blown. And you know, like just like give me the
Yeah.
passion, give me
Yeah.
the like, why do you care so much about being here? And show me that like it was that passion that got you through all the adversity that you faced throughout the game. And I think unfortunately, like Owen, you know, he didn't believe in his game as
Yeah.
much, I think, in that moment. Which is I think a really hard thing to
Yeah.
do after
For
26
sure.
days of being starving and having a jury look at you with judgmental eyes and, you know, all of that stuff. But, you know, I think that, you know, we got very different kind of performances where like Gabler was kind of like vague but confident. You had
Yeah.
Cass, who was confident and specific. And then you
Yeah.
had Owen, who was like specific but not super confident.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. I think
and
it's.
yeah,
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
I will just ultimately that, you know,
Yeah.
they went with Gabler, and that
Yeah.
is it could have been from your preconception. They might have already
Yeah.
wanted to go Gabler, but I think it's interesting that they went in that direction.
Yeah, and I think with Owen, like Owen is like an angel on earth, with a little edge to him, which I like.
Yeah.
I like edgy Owen. I think that's the funnest Owen for sure. But you know, he is one of the most likable people on the whole cast, and that says something. That says a lot because I feel like this cast in general was very likable. Like I can't even think of one person that I was like, like you're not somebody that I feel like is like nice or cool or whatever. Like they all just seem like very nice people, down to earth people. And Owen, especially, like he seems like a really sweet guy. And you know, self awareness is so important in Survivor. But I almost wonder if he had like too much self awareness because he's
Mm,
like this big fan. He knows the game so well. He loves the game so much. And he has a ton of awareness over how his game went versus how he wanted it to go. And I think that, you know, like you said, he feel like you could almost see the struggle in his mindset of like, if I really try to passionately push myself, am I disrespecting the game because, you know, I don't fully believe it myself? And I
mhm,
think that that is not what you want in that moment, but it's hard for somebody who's as smart and self-aware as he is to try to like sell, like he doesn't want to sell a lie. He wants to be authentic and genuine. But I
yeah.
think you can, you know, kind of sell your case without being inauthentic, but maybe not leaning as much into it. Like I think some of the self-awareness that he displayed was very important because, you know, if you have somebody who was not in charge at all come and say like, I knew all of that was happening and I was fine to be left out, that was my strategy, like that comes across as so fake. But if you have somebody that knows that but still can like look towards things or sell or highlight, you know, specific parts that are more positive, like I think the moment where I was like, you know, I could see you going more positive right now is when they asked for a particular move, you know, and he's like, I didn't really have one, because he's trying to be down to earth and genuine. But I think in that moment, maybe you say something like, I could have taken out Jesse at 6, but I chose not to for this reason, you know, because that he had agency in that moment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, or even just kind of like, listen, I can't tell you a move that I made. This was a rough game for me. But what I can tell you is that, like, don't underestimate how difficult this game can be when you're constantly on the bottom.
Mhm.
I'm cheating because I'm like taking from the most recent Big Brother winner who
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
crushed it in this kind of spot, right?
Yeah.
But like that's sort of why I was looking for it. And this season probably filmed before that
Yeah, it did.
Big Brother
Yeah.
season
Yeah.
aired. So maybe didn't have that. Hey, maybe if that season had aired, Owen comes in
Maybe.
with maybe a little different bit of a knowledge set. But I think that like that self awareness that you're talking about is crucial because I think that's why it's so important to go beyond the knee jerk reaction of like, oh, Owen won, or sorry, Gabler won. That sucks. He sucks. Like, screw this season. Like, okay, but maybe, but let's also like just like stop down and take a look at like whether you agree or not why it might have happened. Because if you can
Mhm.
understand, if you can sort of conceptualize Gabler's journey, then that gives you another tool in the toolbox if you go out on the island and you end up playing a game you did not expect to play and you find you're
Mhm.
like, am I the Gabler right now?
Right.
Now you have a genuine like sort of like path that you can follow to say, hey,
Right.
no, this is a winning game. I
Yeah.
can sell it like this. And that's
Right.
again kind of why I wish I knew more of how Gabler's game ultimately was
Yes.
sold.
Yeah.
But the more paths you are able to see and conceptualize to the end, and
Mhm.
why they might be worthy of a win, the better
Mhm.
able you'll be to sell that kind of game. And I
Mhm.
think that's a really dangerous spot to be in for other players. If you're somebody who can go, okay, I'm playing an Owen game, that means there's
Mhm.
no chance to win in the end, obviously,
Right.
and believe that while the game is happening and
Mhm.
sell it to other people. And then the second you get to the end, you go,
Flip it
actually,
around.
hold on,
Yeah.
I've got
Yeah.
a whole other mindset.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that can
And
be
I
a good
think
place to be. Yeah.
I think that in Owen's position, also the other thing to kind of sell potentially is like none of you should have let me get here because
Yep.
in Survivor history, you have Danny Boatwright, you have Chris Daughtry, who are on the outs and they're let slide by Bob Crowley all the way to the end, and they haven't made any enemies. They haven't made the moves that have hurt people along the way, and you should never let that person get there to begin with. So nobody should have let me get here, and yet people stop targeting me at a particular point in time. Like I think that if you don't have like something specific to point to, then maybe that sort of argument may work a bit better. But that being said, it is also very possible that without that big fire making move that he was looking for and he felt he needed for his game, maybe he couldn't have won. But I do think that he did as good as he could have in the situation that he was in. He just got dealt a really bad hand.
Yep.
And I think I love this final three. Obviously, Jesse and Carla both played amazing games as well. And if they made it to the end and won, that would have been really cool. But this final three was it's one that has a lot of interesting discussion, which is why I like to see it. Like I don't necessarily need every season of Survivor to have like the best player win. It would have been nice occasionally, but that's fine. I'm just kidding. But I think this whole discussion has been very good. And I had a question for you, which doesn't really have to do with the season per se, but it is something that was brought up. Is do you think that the jury should be sequestered? Because I feel like since the early seasons, they were, as far as I am aware, they were not really talking a lot of game, and they were supposed to basically vote independently. And I don't think it's a coincidence that all those early seasons are the ones that have the closest margins of
Yep.
4-3 several times in a row. And I think that makes a more exciting finish. But what are your thoughts?
This is a long held belief of mine that my ideal version of it is even more extreme. In my perfect world, the jury would work like this. Everybody is individually sequestered. They have no contact with other jury members. They don't even know what's happening in the rest of the game. They find out who the final two is when they walk out and meet the final two by themselves, individual questioning as well.
Wow.
And then the jury, the two people, the final two, they have to sell to that person, each person, like what happened in the game.
Mhm.
And as that person, you have no knowledge. You have to go off of like, who do you believe? Who's telling the better story? Who's convincing me of what? And it's entirely your opinion. I get why that might not be. There are ways that that could not be the best television if it's
Mhm.
like a similar story being told to each juror.
Yeah.
And so, I would certainly would be willing to accept being individually sequestered until one big jury questioning segment like normal. But I think
Mhm.
the individual sequestering is so huge because what the open secret of Big Brother and Survivor is that 95 to 99% of the time, the jury has already made their decision based on discussions that they've had before going into the final tribal. Sometimes they've decided before the final three is even decided. It's like, well, it's going to
Yeah.
be this
Yeah.
person if they're there, and if it's this
Yeah.
person if they're not there.
Yeah.
And that leads to very lopsided votes, and I think it's less interesting, and it's also
Mhm.
less in the player's control because those discussions, you have very little influence over those discussions being
Yeah.
had. And
Yeah.
so the more agency you give the players, I think the better the game and the more interesting the result will be. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm about it.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I would say that that I had known as a fan of the game, like a lot of times the juries are decided before they go in, and it's kind of a bummer. But what one thing I really liked about the Survivor 42 jury was that there were a few people. I would say about half were like decided on what they were going to do, but then the other half were not. And so
Mhm.
for us, the four of us that were not. Um, 4 to 5 that were not decided actually did make a decision at final tribal. And some people were leaning the other way even and were flipped. So it's like, I thought that I really liked that part because I felt like, a couple people that would stay up really late in the jury house and kind of like be the lawyer for each person, or be the prosecutor against each person to like kind of be more well-rounded. I really enjoyed that. But that being said, that is a very vibe specific thing. Like you don't always get that. And I think when you do have a lot of discussion without the other people in the game still there, it can be very much viewed in a different lens. And so, like, all of the information is not on the table. So that's why, with your idea of like having one-on-ones, I don't love that either, just because it's so easy for the finalists to like lie or not really own their full game. And that is a game within a game. But like if we're trying to get to the end and then like really pitch what you actually did, I like
Mhm.
the idea of having everybody at least there, because
Yeah.
then you can't tell something totally egregious. And if a jury member is then going to say something against the finalist, then they're there to defend themselves. So it's like I think that when you have everybody in a room together, then you're the closest to the truth that you ever will be, because you can't tell something completely outrageous because everybody's there.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. Like I said, my extreme version of it is like my own
Yeah.
person. I don't think that most people would agree with me on that part, but I do think that there's a very strong case for individually sequestering
Yes.
until
Yeah.
the big jury questioning. Because here's the thing, even if you are an undecided juror going into
Yeah.
the final tribal, but you know that at least half the jury is
Yeah.
already decided, that also is going to influence you in some way, right? Like, well,
Yes. Yeah.
I could vote this way, but I know they're all voting this way. So,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
might
For
need to be
sure.
more strategic with your vote, or you might feel like it doesn't matter. Like there are
Yeah.
all kinds of ways that it still can influence you.
Agree.
And so like even just like coming in with a blank slate in terms of influence from other jury members, you can still hear their case being made at tribal, but at least
Mhm.
now the final two or three are involved in that discussion,
Yes.
right?
Agreed.
And so
Agreed.
that I feel like is a better way forward. But
And it's
um,
just better TV. Like there's not
yeah.
it's not a coincidence that there are landslide votes now. So
Mhm.
I think that makes it like I crave that 5-5 again. We haven't had that in so long, just because
Right.
it's always so obvious what everybody's gonna do.
Yep. So here we are. I mean, I guess we should also touch on Jesse. I mean, of course, we're gonna rate the players soon, but
Hmm.
Jesse goes out here. And I felt like I knew this was going to happen on some level.
Hmm.
That like the second I finally was like, okay, fine, I'll give Jesse a 10
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I've been
yeah.
holding back and he keeps proving me wrong that he's still not being
Yeah.
targeted. I was like, but this time it's probably not gonna work out for him.
You
um,
did that to me too, you monster.
I
You gave
did
me
I
a
did the
10 and then
same
I went
thing
out the next time.
because it's just like
Um,
you keep seeing like these holes and you're like, well, this could really backfire, and then it doesn't, and then you're
yeah.
like, okay, but this time it could backfire, and then it doesn't, and you're like, okay, you know what? kudos to this person. They're somehow getting through. And then it's like, then it backfires. Like, okay,
Yeah.
well.
I think that Jesse played honestly like one of the best games of all time, and I think
Mhm.
that it was truly incredible to watch him play the game. I think he is like it was I was in awe. Like I couldn't believe how good that he did. And I was not of your mindset because I really thought he was going to get to the end. I thought he would make his way through fire and then he would be there. And I was wrong about that. But it was still like how what else can you really say about what like he shouldn't have really done anything different. I don't think it just you can do everything right and the wrong thing can happen. And so I don't really think that that moment defines him as a player at all. I still think he was the best player of the season, and has a lot to be proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately I can't help but look back at the decision to cut Cody when he did,
Mhm.
and think what would have happened if he had
Yeah,
decided to keep Cody around.
right.
I think that like I've seen some rumblings that like at the time Cody was seen as a bigger threat. Cody
Mhm.
was seen as perhaps the driver. Um, but I still just can't help but feel like I mean, Jesse is so good. I mean, in those confessionals when he's talking about his family, in the
Yeah,
reunion when he's talking about his game and how much it meant, I feel like you put Jesse in a final tribal seat,
right,
nobody's gonna stop him, especially when he's got Janine's idol in his pocket.
right.
Like, I feel like there's no way anybody beats Jesse if he gets there. And I've also kind of seen like Cody wasn't really looking to cut Jesse as far as I'm aware.
No, yeah, that's true.
So like if Cody sticks around, I feel like you've got a much better shot at getting through 4, sitting in the
Yeah,
end. And hey, maybe you can still cut Cody at
yeah.
4 or whatever. And if you don't, at least you're sitting there and you've got a
Mhm.
chance to make that case. And you know, I at the same time, I don't think it was like objectively a wrong play to cut Cody there either, because
Yeah,
it gives him a lot of runway. You know, playing
right.
the idol at 5, all he has to do is win immunity or fire at 4, and he's very clearly won the
Yeah,
game.
yeah,
And it's a really cool move. And like,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
sometimes you want to make the cool move and make good
yeah.
TV, I think.
Yeah, I
Uh,
guess it's like his win equity might be a little bit lower if he takes the risk of keeping Cody in the game, but he's more likely to get there
right.
versus the way it played out. And I think that they're so, I feel like it's almost like comparing apples to oranges in some
Yeah.
ways because it's like one thing is different than he gets to Final Four the way it was already. But one thing that I did actually really like that he was thinking in the finale specifically was, do you now take this moment at 5 to cut Cassidy out? Because if Cassidy goes at 5, you still have Carla, and they're
Yep.
clearly very focused on Carla. Maybe you slip through one more round into the final 3. But I think that in his position, it was going to be really hard to give up his immunity idol and give it to Carla because he could have gone home instead, and he would have had he done that. So
And I think the problem too is that once it got to that point, if he gives up his like if he had won immunity or
yeah,
if she had won immunity,
yeah,
that's a different story.
yeah,
But he would have to find like he would have to give her the idol ahead of that. Like the problem is
yeah,
that like by using an idol on Carla to save Carla, she's clearly no longer a bigger threat than you. Like you clearly are. You've just made a
yeah,
very
yeah,
public with Janine's
yeah,
idol. You saved
yeah.
Carla. Like you're still clearly the
Yeah.
bigger threat here.
Although,
Uh,
do you think that with Carla's hand injury, it would be easier for him to beat her? Because, I like when you're striking that flint, like you need your hands to be like fully
oh yeah, I mean,
on par.
if he was facing off against her in fire, I think he has a better chance. But I think he's probably facing like still Owen or
Right. Still
Gabler
okay.
at that
Owen
point.
Gabler. Right, right, right,
Um,
right.
And so, but I think you could certainly make a case that like, hey, if he had used that idol to take out Cass, then Cass isn't there to win Final Four immunity, and maybe he has a
Right.
chance there, especially like,
With
hey,
everybody
Owen
talking
broke
over.
his
Yeah.
stick and Gabler's
Right.
fell, so you were going steady behind that. Maybe there's a chance he wins Final Four immunity. Um, I think similar to the other situation, it's like, yeah, knowing now what happens, we can say that might have been the call, but in the moment, even the Cody decision where I do feel like at the time I said this is an incredibly impressive move. I don't think it's the one I would have made, but
Right.
like
Right.
I can appreciate how great it is. Um I would still say like if somebody were in Jesse's spot, I wouldn't definitively tell them not to do it because I still feel like it's just a small in my opinion it's a small edge. It's maybe
Mhm.
like 60-40. Maybe he saw it as like, you know, 55, 50, 45. Or, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
at the end of
I
the day,
was
there's small margins that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this scenario of like him being either, you know, you keep Cody, maybe you have less of an argument that you're clearly the front runner at the end of the game, but you still make it there and may win, versus do you like kind of like Tyson had mentioned at one point, do you let the wheels start falling off right before the end so everybody knows you're in charge, but then you still have to make it there? And but if you get there, like you're out and ahead. And I think, is this similar to like how people play Mario Kart, for instance? Because I'm trying to relate that to myself. And like when I'm playing Mario Kart, I just want to be in front. Like I'd rather deal with the blue
Mm,
shell as it comes up. I'd rather just get out in front and stay out in front rather than, you know, kind of draft behind and then hope that I can make it in right at the last second. So I do wonder how Jesse plays Mario Kart, but I don't know if one strategy is necessarily better than the other. And I think what resonates more with me with Jesse's strategy is the one that he went with, because I remember thinking back to the strategy that I had. Like my goal was to use the idle nullifier on Mike at final five. And that would be the moment that I kind of revealed that I was playing the game, where I was trying to hide it before then.
hmm
But then I would be in that position at four where I would have to like make it through either but with an immunity win or fire. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's better. Like I guess it's very situational, but you sound like you might be more of the other mindset of like you're gonna sneak in past that blue shell when it takes out number one.
Well, it's funny you say that. I don't usually bring this up because it's a dumb online game, but I did play an online, you know, game like this, social strategy game.
Yeah.
And I was actually, I guess, in a somewhat similar situation. I had two idols essentially.
Jeez.
And I, because of that, I had like a game plan of how to get to the end. And so I intentionally, there was a round where like you can secretly like say rumors, nobody knows it's you. So I intentionally put a target on my own back. I said,
Right.
Taran's running the game, because
Right.
I wanted votes on me, because I wanted to deflect them with my two
Right.
idols, because I had a plan. We rigged the game for the final four, final five immunity. It was majority rules. I'd come up with a system, and I had a plan
Yeah.
for the final four to get to the final two.
Right.
That was theoretically foolproof.
Right.
But
Yeah.
basically, I went with the strategy of make myself the big target so that I
Yeah.
guarantee I win in the end. But only because I felt like I had a really solid
To get
plan
there.
to get
Right.
through those final elimination rounds. Whereas in Survivor, unless I feel amazing about fire making, or
Mhm.
that I'm like really good at these immunities compared to everyone else, I think I might go in a different direction, especially like
Right.
if I'm in Jesse's spot and I'm not super confident in fire making and I haven't won any immunities. I don't know that I would ever feel comfortable putting my entire game in the hands of that one round, winning
Right.
one of those things.
Right.
And I would rather take the safer play and then make my case at the end. So I do think it's situational, and I apologize for bringing up a dumb online game to
No,
try to
we
relate to
well,
this,
how
but
did it end? Did you win or no?
well, like I said, oh, it was theoretically a foolproof plan, but the I had gone through too many pregame codes with Amon, my partner, and
Right.
he got one mixed up, and so our votes
Oh
ended up
no.
not coordinating the way that they were supposed to.
Oh,
But he
my.
ended up winning,
Obviously,
so
I'm on. Okay, there
yeah,
you go.
there you
And
go.
then I guess, well, I know we're on Survivor, but in the same vein for Big Brother, are you the type of player that is throwing Final Five HOH?
Ooh, yeah, I think it's just so situational, right? Like,
You want that Final Four. I feel like you want two chances at that.
I do. If like it would be worse to go out at five, and five is a dangerous place to be,
Right.
right? Like, and so it depends on where, because you can't always be protected at five by the
Yeah.
HOH,
Yeah.
in the same way that you can't at all at the final four.
Yeah.
So you know, it really just I obviously ideally you get to play final four, final three,
Right.
but you know, I think these spots are just so situational. But I do think in general, I would err on the side of safety. I would err on the side of
Yeah.
get to the end at all costs,
Right.
and only put a target on yourself if you feel very confident that you can get there anyway.
Right. Fair enough.
That's what my instinct would be.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I just, Jesse was an incredible player. I just don't understand. Like, he doesn't look like somebody that we so bad at challenges, but he like consistently was. but I mean, every Superman has to have a foil, right? So I guess the challenges are Jesse's Survivor Kryptonite, and I say that as someone who wasn't like extraordinary myself, but I thought that he did the best that he could, and I thought he played a great game, and honestly, Carla did too. Like obviously, Carla's game kind of fell apart in the last few episodes, but that's mostly because she was kind of outflanked by Jesse a little bit, and then Sammy kind of did her in a little bit too by giving her bad info about Cassidy. And then that whole thing fell apart as well, which wasn't great for Carla's positioning. But, I thought her exit was very powerful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So should we start rating these players?
Let's do it.
All right.
It's like cheating, but we know the results. So like we'll look so smart.
Truly. All right. So here are the players if you've forgotten them somehow, including Cody, because 5 is a weird amount of pictures to have in one image.
Okay, but we're not ranking Cody, right?
We're not ranking Cody. He's out.
Okay.
But let's go in order of placement here. So we'll start with Carla, who went out at 5. I think that again, like for everybody but the winner, like we're not really like ranking their whole game. We're mostly ranking their performance up until they lost in this particular episode.
In this episode, so not the full season.
Yeah, that's the aim here for the finale, except for the winner, who will be a little more open to their whole overall game. So for Carla, I mean, I thought that Carla would have zero presence in immunity challenges or advantage findings. Like, I thought, injured ankle. She's done. There's not enough. This is such a short season, not enough time to recover. She also has a messed up hand. She's also like, lost feeling in her hand. Like, I was like, it's over. Like she's great at, getting through the pain, but like it's over for her. And then she goes and like gets an advantage. And I was like, okay, wow. Impressive that she got the advantage, but a balance beam? No way. And then she crushes it. And she came close here to saving herself. I think that like physically, Carla is one of the, because like we can talk all about like last season, Jonathan being super impressive physically. And he certainly was, but Carla is in my eyes like one of the most impressive physical players that I've seen in a while, based on how much of a beating she took. And that she managed to persevere every time when she hit, because look, I have an injury on my hand. My finger still hurts when I tried to grab things. So when she slammed her hand on a thing, I was like, oof, that's it for Carla. And she just kept going and climbed a rope. And just like every step of the way, she like nothing could take her down. And I was just so impressed by that. Strategically, it has not gone great. And even though obviously getting Jesse out is key here, I think that trying to get almost anybody else out would have been easier for her at this point, but I can't blame her too much because she doesn't know that Jesse has an idol. And not knowing that, you would assume that Jesse's the best play. But unbeknownst to her, she was doomed the second she started. Like her path forward was a dead end because he was always going to be able to save himself. So, not the best episode for Carla, but I also don't think it's the worst one. And I'm still just so impressed by her physicality. And also the fact that despite some of the mistakes that she's made in the last couple of rounds, she goes out as a big threat, as somebody that if she had made it to the final 3, good chance she still would have won, which I think is a testament to her social game. So I would give her like a 6 here.
Okay. So I think that for the finale, so I also want to say you're totally right in her physical game being like pretty impressive. And I would say that I don't really watch Survivor for the challenges and stuff like that. I probably would more likely watch the challenge for that. But I was impressed with Carla. And I think it's rare for me to be, I was very impressed with Jonathan's feat last season and all of that. But I think that Carla's ability to kind of like persevere and be the underdog, at least on paper. You know, she didn't necessarily come here to be a challenge beast. She had really great social skills, and, you know, kind of surprised herself at times. But that also kind of inspired me to be like, you know, people really can do more than they think they can as long as they like really believe it. And you could tell at times she really believed in herself. So I thought that was really cool to watch, because you can still learn stuff from people in ways that you don't necessarily expect. In terms of strategically, there were some things that she did that I liked, and there's other things that didn't really work as well. I think that targeting Jesse was the right thing, because he obviously was the biggest threat to kind of go after at that point. I guess the other argument on the flip side could have been appealing to Cassidy and Owen, being like, do we vote out, you know, Gabler, who may take up a spot in the final three, if that's the kind of route that she wanted to take. But I think for her, going after Jesse, not knowing he has an idol, because how would she know, is the right play. And then ultimately, you know, kind of reminded me a little bit of Natalie Anderson playing the idol on Jacqueline. You know, at the time, I remember thinking like, you know, Jacqueline, you should be voting for Natalie, because, you know, you could get her out even if she plays her idol on you. And Carla would have accomplished the same thing if Jesse had played the idol on her. Now, it sounds like there was, you know, Carla had went to Cassidy and Owen in tribal council and said that that idol's fake. And then they told Jesse that. And so it kind of put her in on the outs. The things that I didn't love that Carla did was like, you know, threatening jury stuff.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Because I think that is like, the jury is a part of the game. So it is a tool that I think that players can use maybe more than they do. But I can't think of one time in Survivor history where threatening, or Big Brother history, which I think we probably are more aware of because there's live feeds and people probably do that more often. But I don't think that's ever a strategy that really works. And it just leaves a sour taste in people's mouths. I think the way, if you're going to do that, that might be more leveraging, is you help me get through. You put Jesse's name ahead of me and I will vote for you to win, or something like that. Like, I think that that is maybe the better angle to take. But I think for her finale, I would probably give her, which is a lot lower than it would have been for the rest of the season, but probably like a 4.
Yeah, you know, reminding me about that, I think I do have to dock her at least 1 point for that attempt, because that's one of those things where like you should know better than to threaten your jury vote, especially on Survivor. Like Big Brother, it also never works. But at least on Big Brother, it's difficult to communicate to the jury. On Survivor, if Carla threatens her jury vote to me, then all I need to do to start to counteract this is at the next tribal be like, look, Jeff, at the end of the day, Carla said that she's going to poison the jury against me if I vote her out here, but I have to vote her out here.
Yeah.
Like, just call it out, because it's kind of like, most of the time, if you're on the jury and you hear that somebody's going to come and change your mind, it's kind
you're
of
not going to like that. Yeah.
It's kind of insulting to say, I'm going to make sure the jury doesn't vote for you. If you're on the jury and you're like, well, hey, I get to make my own decision. And you kind of don't want, like, you've also kind of like been implicated in a crime. Like, wait, I'm not an accomplice to this. I didn't make this threat. So it's a really easy way to counteract a good amount of any impact that somebody might have if they make that threat. And add on top of that, again, it never works, because what kind of situation, like, what do you do from there? Like, okay, I won't vote you out now, but then you're just going to make this threat again next time. You know,
and
like,
also, like, do you want it, like, when you have that few people left in the game, you know, saying something that clearly breaks down trust completely, does Cassidy really want to keep somebody in the game that she has no trust with it now at all? You know, like, I think those two had a chance to kind of get on the same page before that, but yeah, I agree. Like, it just wasn't the right vibe. And like, you saw Adam Gentry use that strategy well in Cook Islands, but it was the rewarding strategy as opposed to the punishing one.
Yeah, promising, hey, I will vote for you, especially because like Adam and Yul weren't super close. So it's like, you know, it was reasonable that Adam wouldn't feel strongly about voting for Yul prior to that. Whereas like, if you're an ally or a friend of somebody and you're like, well, if you keep me this time, I will vote for you in the jury, you might be like, wait, why wouldn't you? You're not going to vote for me in the jury if I don't do this? Like, so like, even that is kind of tricky, but I absolutely agree. Like, the positive spin on it is certainly a lot better than the the threat of it. And you know, I'm talking about all of the stuff around it. The emotional core of it, taking logic out, is that it
Mhm.
just pisses people off.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
how dare you? Like,
yeah, yeah,
I'm not gonna bow down to your threats. I'm going to like
yeah,
I'm gonna take you out because you just threatened me now. Like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
vote however you want. Like,
yeah.
whatever.
And it's
Um,
I feel like it's a testament to like what a position she must have felt that she was in, because it's very inconsistent with the rest of her gameplay. But
mhm.
you know, obviously we have to judge. We have to put a number to it. So you know,
Yeah.
we have to bring it up here.
All right. Let's talk about Jesse.
So wait, what is your final score? Five or
Final
six?
score of 5. I
Okay,
drop it
five.
down to a 5.
Okay.
Um, let's talk about Jesse. Jesse is so interesting to rate here. This episode, I did find some fault with how he played his round.
Okay.
Um,
Tell me. Tell me.
so first of all, like obviously from the round before, he is now the obvious threat. He was not able to mitigate that like he had been previous rounds.
Right.
So that by itself, like, okay, not the best, but I also don't fault you too much. You kind of want people to respect you at this point.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, but and people might disagree with me on this because I talked a little bit about it while I streamed the episode, and the chat kind of pushed back on me. But I, especially having watched a lot of recent winners in Big
Hmm.
Brother, on Survivor, I feel like sometimes you take for granted how uh, perception is reality
Hmm.
in the game,
Hmm.
and you sometimes think, well, I'm the biggest threat now, and that's the reality, and there's nothing I can do to change that.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
just sink into that role.
Right.
Um, but I have seen this countless times on shows before that
Right.
somebody's the biggest threat. It's obvious. Everybody knows it. Everybody talks about it. But that person never gives up on trying to convince people that they're actually not a threat.
Right.
And then lo and behold, at the last hour, at the last minute, at the last second, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I need to take out the other person instead. And then they go
Right.
on to win, right? Like it's not impossible that if you plant those seeds that, you know, what happens is Cass wins Final Four immunity
Uh-huh.
and she has a decision to make. And it's a
Yeah.
really hard decision. There's $1 million sitting on the other side of that decision.
Yeah.
And she's thinking about it really hard. And she is going to start to think through every possible conceivable scenario. And she's going to be thinking and overthinking. And that's where you can sometimes, I think, get in there, especially if
Yeah.
you've planted seeds ahead of time and be like, look, I know you think I'm the biggest threat, but have you thought about Owen and his story? Have you thought about how great
Right.
Gabler, like it's going to be hard to convince her about Gabler, but
Yeah.
like,
Well, I
you
mean, look
know,
how
like
things turned out.
I want to see more attempts to like mitigate threat level if possible. Like you think I'm actually the biggest threat, but in reality, I'm the biggest goat.
Right.
And so when he whips out Janine's idol at
Yeah. Oh
Tribal
my
at
gosh.
5, there wasn't really a purpose to it. It doesn't do anything other than like just steal more credit away from everybody else at Tribal to himself.
Right.
Like, hey, this is still my Tribal, even though I'm not controlling it.
Right.
Which is like fine if he wants more jury votes, but I think at that point he was so locked in anyway, it like didn't matter at all. So like, why not just like
Right.
let them have a moment and look like you're a defeated person who can't save Carla, and even though he tried.
Right.
And then
Right.
maybe that gives you just enough perception that when Cass wins immunity, and it would have been better if Cass hadn't won immunity. Let's say
Yeah.
Gabler wins immunity, and now you can
Yeah.
talk to Gabler about ride or die alliance and how you're actually
Yeah.
not that big of a threat, and it's actually Cass
Right.
and Owen that have been winning all the immunities. I feel like it just opens more opportunities. So because whipping out the idol didn't actually do anything at all other than solidify him as a threat, I disagreed with doing it in that moment.
Okay.
But again, I'm nitpicking here because
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Jesse's an amazing player.
Yeah. Yeah. For
And
sure.
and I'm talking about like high range of ratings. So I mean, ultimately, he was an immunity challenge and a fire making challenge away from being
Yeah.
an incredibly decisive and dominant winner of the
Yeah.
game. Ultimately, he loses. I have a couple of nitpicks, so I'm going to go with a 7.
Okay, interesting. So, I, c- I can kind of see what you're saying for some of it, but I don't know if I agree. for the decision to whip out the idol.
Mhm.
So with whipping out the idol, you know, I could see it two ways. One is you just don't do it at all, right? And then you
Mhm.
save that idol for your final tribal Marianne moment, right? Because
Mhm.
that's an option. But I think with him not having immunity,
You gotta play it.
he has to play it. So if he has to play it, you know, what's the difference? Like it's going to come out at the end of tribal or the beginning. Now, if nothing else is going to change with what your game plan is, then I think pulling it at the end is fine. But with him considering voting out Cassidy in that moment, or I read an interview that he did where he was considering it, but as soon as Carla kind of ratted him out a little bit at tribal, it was like, okay, done. That's not an option anymore. We're going to move forward. And so to get that Cassidy move done, or at least explore that option, you kind of have to bring it up beforehand. Otherwise, you may not necessarily get the traction you need to move things in that direction, because you at that time you don't know if they're voting for you. Like from his perspective, he doesn't know if they're voting for him or if they're voting for Carla. He pulls that idol out, they almost certainly are all going to put their votes on Carla, and then if he can trust her enough to vote for Cassidy, then he could flip his idol onto her and then get who he wants gone. And if he's trying to keep that door open, then I think you have to pull it out when he did. Now, that being said, obviously it didn't go that way and it didn't pan out that way. For me, I think that I agree that sometimes you should try to lower your threat level, of course, but I feel like, especially on Survivor, like you mentioned, like you're way more in front of the jury. It's a little bit harder to do that, especially if people pick up on the fact that they were all like, Jesse did that, like Jesse's Jesse, and you can see them lighting up. Whereas on Big Brother, I think it's easier because they're not around, so you could have Kevin from BB Can 10 telling everybody he's not a threat anymore, and then they keep him around every round, even though they shouldn't. Although I'm partway through that season, I haven't finished the whole thing yet, but I've heard that's kind of what happens. So I think it's harder for him to do that. So I think, in the position that he was in, like if he had cinched it, obviously that's an easy way to go with an 8, 9, or 10. But I kind of agree with your rating at 7, just because like I feel like there wasn't a lot more he could do differently,
Mhm.
at least significantly so. He was in a rough spot where he had to win either the HOH or veto, and he didn't. So I don't think I can fault him too much for that, but also can't give him a very high score.
Yeah. And again, I want to make sure that I'm reiterating that, like, because I think it can be easy to fall into the sort of feeling of
Yeah, yeah,
being more critical than not on a
yeah,
player that is very good.
yeah.
I think that everyone can agree and already kind of sees, like, yeah, Jesse has been great. And we've talked about all of the great things Jesse has done to
Yeah.
get to this point. And so now we're kind of like, okay, where are some of the small little moments that maybe could have
Mhm.
altered his fate? When
Yeah.
in reality, again, like he came really close.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, sometimes it just doesn't work out. And if he is a little more lucky, he's a winner right now. And we're not talking about any of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
For sure.
all right. So there's Jesse. Let's talk about Owen,
Oh,
who he won immunity at 5, and then ultimately doesn't have to make fire because he was seen as a bigger threat, even though he was
mhm,
actually not the bigger threat
mhm.
theoretically. Um, and he seemed to want to make fire. He wanted to be in that spot, which I think I can understand why. I would still like, I, and this is again, it's not always going to work, but like for me, if I have the choice between do something dangerous to look good to the jury or don't do something dangerous and like solidify my position to the end, I want to solidify my position to the end
Yeah.
and then convince the jury that that was the more impressive thing. Like that's
Right.
going to be the path that I try to take most of the time, which is not to say that it is the best path.
Mhm.
Especially if you aren't able to convince the jury or if there's just nothing that you can do. Now, I say that, but it was also funny, like hearing Jeff ask them about like, what do you want? Do you want to make fire? Because
Right.
I was literally just like, who cares?
Right.
Cass
Yeah.
certainly
Agreed.
doesn't. Cass
Yeah.
doesn't care about whether they want to or not. She's going to make
Yeah.
the decision she thinks makes the most sense for them.
Yeah.
So saying you want to, saying you don't want to is also, or could also just be a performance to the
And
jury.
also, Jesse did not want to make fire.
Right,
It's not 3,
exactly.
it's 2.
Yeah. So, you know, if the jury is like, hey, we respect people that want to go in and make fire, then by all accounts, by all means, be like, yeah, send me in, coach.
Yeah.
But don't really.
Yeah.
You know, whatever you want to do there. So you know, I'm not gonna like fault him for that. I just wanted to point out another weird thing about fire making.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we've already talked about his final tribal performance. I think that I think that there was a lack of confidence, but I also think like for as much as I said, I wish that there were changes that he made to his final tribal performance. I wish he was more
Mhm.
confident, he was more passionate. Uh, it doesn't mean that it would have changed anything.
Yeah.
You know, that's always the case when we critique final tribal performances, is that we can do our best to try to be like, this is how it could have been improved. But at the
Mhm.
end of the day, unless we were on the jury, we have no idea what they would have needed to see in order to give Owen
Right.
the win. So, you know, I don't have a lot of like active faults from Owen in
Mhm.
this episode in particular. I actually, again, thought his final tribal performance was fine. He is ultimately a 0 vote finalist, which he did not want to be, but but you know, what are you gonna do?
Still made it to the end, King.
Yeah.
Can't say the same for all of us.
But before I give my rating, Omer, what are your thoughts on Owen?
So I think Owen is an interesting situation. I think he said in an interview, you know, like he's trying to win Survivor with a blackjack hand at 15. And I think that's a very, very good analogy
Yeah.
for the way that things were set up for him. And so I don't think, you know, I think he knew what he needed. So again, I typically agree that this like whole bravado of I must win immunity, give it up, go to fire, blah 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 to win is kind of like BS, and that it shouldn't be an expectation. However, just as with anything that you know shouldn't be an expectation, there's a time and a place. There's a time and a place for everything. And for Owen's game, given how things had went, you know, he probably does need something like that. To you know really show that he's taking control of the bull by the horns. This is his moment, and that's what he needs to do. And that's kind of what he had described wanting to do, was basically win that final four immunity, give up immunity, go into fire, win, and that's his time to take the reins and have agency and show that he is in control of the game. And I think that for his position, that works better than someone like Cassidy's position, where she was already kind of involved in all the votes and shouldn't really theoretically need something like that. And if Owen's confident in his fire abilities, like I think he knew what he needed to do to try to, you know, maybe increase that 15 hand to like 16 or 17, but it ultimately just fell through. And then when it fell through and wasn't what he expected, you know, he kind of folded a little bit in the final tribal. But I also think he gave them pretty much everything he could to try to win, other than, you know, maybe not selling it to the 100th degree. But I think that overall, I probably would give him a 6, just because he wasn't in the best position to begin with, but he kind of had awareness of what it was, and he knew a potential plan to win. It just didn't really work out.
Yeah, I think for me it has to be because I just, even though I could theoretically see a path for him to win, that never really existed on the show.
Yeah.
So I think that I have to give him like a 5 here.
Yeah.
Again, like nothing major, no major faults like in previous episodes where I felt like he really missed opportunities and didn't take them. In this spot, it was like again, like you could have been more passionate in your final tribal performance, but who knows if that would have even made a difference.
Right.
So I don't have a lot of critiques here. Just kind of more, you know, potential missed opportunities, but not as big as previous ones.
Mhm.
And you know, ultimately, it seems like he was probably drawing dead for potentially a while. You
Right.
know, potentially since he didn't take the opportunity to you know orchestrate his own shot on Jesse
Right.
and Cody. So um,
Right.
you know, at the end of the day, it's a pretty neutral response here.
Mm.
And that leaves us with our final, our top two, first and second
Yes.
place. The person I really thought for a long time this season was the winner. And
Cassidy.
yes, Cassidy.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Cassidy?
So I thought that Cassidy's game was fun to watch, and I think that it's, you know, I wish they gave her a little bit more, because they often kind of hid her behind other players a little bit more. But I like that she's a fan, that she's passionate, and she, really went for what she believed in. And I 100% back her decision to not go to fire. Like, I just think it would be dumb to do that. In terms of her decision-making process along the way, I think a lot of where things went wrong for Cassidy is also where it went wrong for Carla, in that they ended up separating. And part of that was additional information brought to Carla by Sammy. That was also probably having a lot to do with Carla and Jesse's relationship being so close that we didn't really see a lot of on the show. But Carla and Cassidy kind of splitting up in the game, I think diluted a lot of their power for each of them, unfortunately. And I remember seeing that moment where they're on the beach, where Carla says, "Go talk to Jesse, he'll back me up." I was waiting for the other shoe to drop for her to be like, "He's the one that told me not to trust you," because that's like the moment where you kind of connect. And so I think that she lost a lot of agency in the game, but that was obviously in a previous episode. So in terms of this episode, like, what were the best decisions for her? I don't hate, obviously, the way her and Carla spoke with each other before Carla leaving the game had an impact on how their votes went. And she said that was the biggest regret of her game at the final tribal. But also, like, when I can kind of see how she would like be defensive when somebody says like, you didn't do anything in the game and I will vote, like, I'll make sure, like, I won't vote for you to win despite being friends. So I think it's hard to like penalize her too much for that, because I can see where that would be kind of caught off guard, especially from her perspective, and how to respond to that. I think ultimately her decision to vote out Carla at 5, I think between Carla and Jesse, it's interchangeable. I mean, their read was that Jesse wouldn't win fire or an immunity challenge, and that read was correct. So I think ultimately that was a fine decision. I think that Owen and Gabler were the correct people for her to go to the end with. And I also think that Gabler was the correct person to put into fire, based off the information that she had at the time, based on what was described. I think her final tribal was probably the weakest part of her game in terms of the finale, because clearly she was not giving them what they felt was an accurate portrayal of her game from their perspective. And so, and I can kind of see, like, if you watch back the episode, that kind of backs up the jury's viewpoint of the Ryan vote, where you have the trio, the boys, which we had no idea. I guess we kind of knew that they were there, but not how important it was. They were clearly making a decision without her knowing that they were even contemplating the other way. And so she wasn't fully in charge of her own game at that point in time. So I think my overall score for her will be an 8. I'm struggling between 8 and 7, because it's maybe final tribal will take me no, I don't know. Maybe can I give her a different scale, like a gold star, like the survey? No, I don't know. I'm so torn between a 7 and 8. Can I hear your opinion and then I'll finalize mine?
Sure. So yeah, it's a tricky one, because I think I agree with you that, like, I can try and look at different points that she could have done something differently, but like at every step, it's like that. I don't think that would have changed anything. Like, she could have tried to vote out Jesse first, and then maybe Carla wouldn't have been as mad. But like, is that even the correct call? Because then,
Right.
even if you could get Jesse out, now you have to deal with Carla, who's probably going to be better at those challenges.
Right.
And now you have, and is Carla going to be any less mad at you for cutting her right before she makes $1 million? Probably not. So, I think ultimately, like, yeah, you do have to kind of make that call. And ultimately, winning Final Four immunity is certainly a lot better than throwing it so that you don't have to not go into fire.
Right.
So it's, she wins that immunity, she crushes it. She then correctly puts the right person into fire. He broke a record to send Jesse out, because getting Jesse out was ultimately way more important than who gets credit for getting Jesse out.
Yeah.
Because if Jesse stays in the game, it's 100% over. If the person who beats Jesse in fire gets a bunch of credit, you still haven't 100% lost. So you're like, the extremes of those two decisions, the downsides are way off. So I think she absolutely makes the correct decision there. I would then say, okay, well, then it was her job to convince the jury that it was the right decision.
Mhm.
and she fails at that.
Yeah.
But it's honestly hard to even blame her too much for that because I actually think
Mhm.
she made a very compelling case. And I
Yeah,
think that she
yeah.
really stood up for herself and said, "Look,
Yeah.
I earned this. It doesn't make sense for me to drop this. It makes sense for Jesse. It doesn't make sense for me. Why would
Mhm.
I not? I'm worst at making fire. I have to put Gabler in here so that
Right,
he can make sure Jesse doesn't make it to the end." And
right.
it was a very compelling case, but the jury just wasn't hearing it. And which leads me to believe that like, I don't know if there's anything that could have been said to that
Yeah,
jury to convince them that that was the right call.
right. Right, I
So like,
agree.
how much can I falter for that? So it's like,
Right.
and then her final tribal performance, I think very clearly the biggest and perhaps only real mistake that I think we can call her out on is the final tribal performance where
Yeah.
she specifically tries to claim a move that wasn't hers.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
And that's something it's a bad read. It's a bad call to go for it based on that bad read, and it looks bad to the jury, certainly. And that's where I would be like, okay, that's a mistake. But honestly, even like outside of that, I thought she was doing pretty decently.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like
I agree.
calling out specific relationships that she had with people, pulling in the emotion when she needed to, the passion, you know, talking about some of her strongest selling points, which were like, hey, a lot of people came for me. And you know what happened every time somebody came for me?
They
They went
gone.
home. Like
Yeah.
that's a good story.
Yeah.
And I felt like she was doing a pretty decent job, but it just didn't land.
Yeah.
So not a lot of mistakes apart from the one, and it's not like. And here's the thing about that mistake too. I I could be wrong, but based on what I've read postseason, based on what we were seeing in the episode, I don't
Yeah.
think that mistake is what cost her the win. I don't
Right.
think that
I
if
agree.
she had not made that mistake, I still don't think she wins the game.
Right.
So it's like, what could she have done? I honestly don't know, other than make
Yeah.
fire,
Yeah.
which I think would have been a dumb thing to
A bad
do.
choice. Yeah. And
So
that's yeah.
it's so difficult.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard because in life and in Survivor, you can do the wrong thing and get the right outcome, and vice versa. And
Mhm.
I think that the jury clearly had an idea of what was best for her game, but I think objectively it probably wasn't. So it's I don't know. I
Yeah.
think I'll end up going with a. So I guess she made it to the end, but didn't get the votes, but I guess had a chance to some extent. Jesse would have won if he made to the end, but didn't make it to the end. So I think what feels right for me is maybe keeping them at the same score as like a
Yeah.
7.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too.
Mhm.
Where it's like, yeah, like this episode alone, I think she performed about as well as she could have, close
Mhm.
to it.
Yeah.
So like episode score is pretty good, but ultimately she loses here.
Yeah.
And I think, she loses either because of a decision that I don't think was a mistake from my point of view, but
Right.
obviously was from the jury's point of view. So
Yeah.
it's like that's going to influence
And
my
they're the
rating.
ones that matter to some extent, but I mean
Right.
they have
Yeah.
the power to give a million.
But
So
they're not making these ratings now, are they?
they're not making these ratings. And also we have like no emotional tie to the situation.
Yes.
So we can
Um,
speak freely.
and then the other theoretical mistake was made before this episode happened.
Yes,
Like
yeah, yeah.
the relationships that she had and all of that stuff that
Mhm.
like I still just like have very little information on. So I think a 7 seems right to me. And so now
Our
we got to
finale
talk about
boy.
Gabler.
Yeah.
Um, I want you to erase all preconceptions of the previous ratings.
Yes.
They have no relation to the Gabler rating. We are rating Gabler
Okay.
as a winner of Survivor this season. What did we think? What did we see? If
Right.
he has a higher or lower rating than other players in this episode, it's because it's an entirely different scale.
Okay.
We're not comparing Gabler to these
Okay.
players. We're comparing Gabler to Tony Vlachos. We're comparing Gabler
Yeah.
to Marianne. We're
Okay.
comparing Gabler to all of the previous winners, so it's a different scale. Let's talk about
I need to watch
Gabler.
that Vessi Tribal Council where they all use the different scale again just to get in my
Yeah.
mindset. Okay. So he can have 3 gold stars, 1 Dundee, like a Dunder Mifflin, 1
Oh,
Dundee point, and then 3 buffs. How about that?
there you go.
There we go. Okay. Okay. So Gabler's whole story arc, I think that his game started off very poorly. which he admitted
Mm-hmm.
himself. Taking that on, like, let me get my immunity idol, but then not play it. I'll play my shot in the dark. What the hell was that? His social game, it seemed a little bit messier on Baka than it did with the other members of Gaia, in the sense that we consistently heard, Sammy getting irritated with him, Owen getting irritated with him, Janine saying he's unhinged, Ellie not being able to, like, going from really protecting him in the game to not wanting to work with him at all. And then he was kind of seen as this guy that would just do what Sammy wanted him to do. And that didn't really end up being the case, as he voted Sammy out of the game. But I think that his larger than life personality almost got him voted out pre-merge, or at least put him in a position that would be as close to like goat-ish as you can get before the merge even. His play on Ellie obviously won him the game to some extent, because that's what everybody was kind of pointing to as like, a wow, you really like exerted your influence. But on the flip side of that, the way in which he went about voting out Ellie, did that put his whole tribe and him on the outer, where he was left out of multiple votes in the next few episodes because he put his own tribe at a disadvantage by imploding it? And B, that could have backfired, in the sense that, like, if you're going to go after Ellie, like, do it on the low, be your Alec Gabler, like, pop out of the water and eat her. Don't announce, I'm coming to kill you. Like he did. He didn't put the poison in Ellie's drink. He came in with the sword. And that could have, Janine had an idol, like that could have really gotten the whole plan messed up. But then I think after, when he's like, I need to go under the radar and sail along, that was probably the best thing that he had done for his game. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's tricky because, like, again, the main thing was how self-aware is he of his actual position in the game. And the thing I think that I consistently got like snagged on was that the way that he talks about his game is as though it was all intentional. It was all planned from the start that he was going to do this. It's going to get him to the end with the right people, and like that's how he's gonna win the game. But the reality of his game was, like, it required a lot of like lucky interventions, which
Yeah.
is true of most games. I'm not saying that it's unique that like Gabler relied so much on luck, whereas other players wouldn't. Certainly, even the people he's sitting next to, Owen and Cass, also relied on a lot of lucky interventions. This was a season, like many modern seasons now, that had a lot of like big contenders going out one after another, in some ways because they got unlucky, or like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, if Jesse wins that fire or that immunity, then it's over. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
over for all of them.
Yeah.
And that's not a very good, like, it's like Jesse's game plan, as much as we can criticize this, like some small bits of it, is better than all of the other three game plans combined.
Right.
Like, they are all much worse players for Jesse getting that close. And to say that you intentionally put yourself in that position is kind of a wild statement. Like, why would you ever intentionally put yourself there?
Yeah.
Now, if you were like, look, I know I'm not very good at controlling the game. I know I
Mm-hmm.
can't direct votes. I know I can't be the big, director, threat, whatever. And I need to scrap and scrape and like do as much as I can to just like barely hang on and hope I get lucky, and maximize my odds of getting lucky. And boom, I got lucky. And like, here are the ways that I helped. Like, I helped influence Jesse to take out Cody. I
Yeah.
helped by taking Jesse out by breaking a record at making fire. Like, I
Yeah.
think that if he had sold it in a way that to me sounded more like I knew my limitations and I did the best that I could with the small amount that I had,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, okay, you know what you're doing. That's
Right.
self-awareness to me. But and I could be wrong about this. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I'm entirely relying on the edit, but like what I get from Gabler when I listen to him talk about his game at Final Tribal in confessionals is,
Alec Gabler kind of came up to the surface.
and
The best assassin doesn't show up at the castle with an axe saying, I'm here to kill the king. He or she slips into the kitchen, puts a vial of poison in the king's bowl, and leaves.
Right. But where was that poison move?
exactly. It's like
Mm.
the way that he describes his own game is it doesn't vibe with how I'm seeing it. Even though I do see, again, similar to what Cass is doing, where it's like Cass also thought that she was more in control of certain votes, but in reality, her game was more physical, more social.
Right.
She wasn't involved in as many strategic decisions as she might have thought. But that doesn't mean that she didn't play a good game.
Right.
So I'm not sure that I see the self-awareness that those confessionals might imply.
Right.
Especially because it's like he didn't intentionally on day one say, "Hey, I'm gonna play my shot in the dark. Please vote me out." Knowing that that would, for the rest of the game, put him in a spot where nobody ever wanted to vote him out because he was not a threat. He did that because it was genuinely who he was and what he wanted to do, and then it kind of like worked out in that direction. And I think that's another part of it where like I'm never seeing in the game moments where he's intentionally playing up a character. I'm seeing him being him and then being like, yeah, I'm under the radar. But I'm like, but do you know how?
Do you know why?
And
I think a lot of the why was like, I mean, people can say all they want now that, you know, there was this respect for him and he didn't want to be seen as a threat. And that was his intentional strategy. But I think a lot of those people were still probably looking to take him to the end to lose. So I don't know.
And I could be wrong about this. And I want to keep reiterating, totally beholden to the edit, have no idea ultimately. But my best, but my best interpretation of what I saw was that when he says, I'm Alec Gabler, I'm hiding in plain sight, I'm laying low, I think it felt like to me what he was saying was, I'm not making the moves that I could be making.
Right.
Instead, whereas like you'd want to interpret it as like, I'm intentionally playing up this like goofy character, which is making me seem non-threatening, that people think I'm a goat. So, you know, I think that's why it felt that way to me. And it could be a misread. Maybe he was saying it in that way, but I never felt like I got that from the episodes.
Yeah, well, I think with him taking ownership of the fact that he messed up on day 3 by saying I should play my shot in the dark and vote me out if you have to do it. I think that vulnerability that came off from him did lead me to take the other things he was saying with a little bit more credit. But I think what I really need to also know is like from the other jury members, because like how was he perceived in the game? Did you see him as a goat or not? Because you know, we all thought that he was a goat the whole time, and it's very rare for the goat to be able to kind of come back from that and claim agency and claim to have their own moves. I like that they did give him that credit to make him not just seem like a replacement level. I'm a zombie that will do whatever all of you say. Like he actually, you know, they did give him some credit for that, but was that how they were perceiving him along the way? And I would be really curious to know that. But I think you know, if he wanted to make moves, he was in positions to do them and he chose not to. So like when Sammy went home, you know, he could have pulled in Sammy, Owen, got a few people to flip their votes and then taken control of the game at that point. But he chose not to. So it's like, for me, I still don't know what his plan was to get to the end without Jesse and Cody there. Like, I still don't really know if that just fell into his lap. And like, it's great that he took out Jesse and Fire, and like, that's impressive. But again, I actually still see that as more Cassidy's move, because Cassidy's the one that put him in there to do it. And he had no control over whether he was going in or not. So I'm very torn, but I think his game's very interesting. I don't think I guess if we're trying to like compare to other people, like he's definitely not a 10. He's not a Tony. He's not a Kim Spradlin. He's not a Redemption Island Boston Rob or a JT or a Jeremy. Although I guess not all of those are probably 10s, but they're pretty close. But he's also, I guess, not really a I don't know if I want to name the other end of that spectrum, but
well, I think like I will tell you that like in my Twitch chat when it happened, immediately I started seeing like he is Bob Crowley. He is you know he is Gabon Bob, and I don't know that I agree necessarily. Right, like you know, maybe we're a little too surface level there. I think their games are pretty different.
Yes, I would agree.
But that seems to be where I think a lot of people are looking. But I think there are also, you know, some people that are like, hey, let's not overlook what could be there. And so like I would definitely say for me it's difficult because I think like I could give like a range of
Right.
like if I look at everything that could be from Gabler's game, if I interpret every single moment in the most generous way possible,
Yes.
then I could see this being like maybe like a 7 or an 8, like really impressive to like really
Yeah.
convince people. Still relied on some, I mean, if Carla wins immunity at 5, it's game over. 100%. One of
Yeah.
Carla or Jesse is in the final 3, which means that they've
Yeah.
almost definitely won the game.
Yeah.
Like you're relying on a lot of things not happening.
Right.
So it's not like you're in a really great spot to win. Still, but I mean, again, like I still can appreciate the idea of somebody who knows their limitations and just optimizes their path as much as they possibly can without overextending. I think that there's a really impressive game in there somewhere, but I don't have a lot of reason to believe that all of those interpretations being generous should be given. And if I interpret every instance with like my most critical eye, I feel like I could go pretty low. I feel like I could be like, you know, down at like a 3 almost, like not a very good game. And so the answer is in my eyes, like somewhere in the middle of that. And the edit, and this is what I, going all the way back to the beginning, I feel like the edit did not give me the material that I needed to figure out where in that range I should fall.
I guess within your scale then, so like you don't even have to name names, but like, you know, there's obviously I feel like some players who have played a 10 game. I feel like what is your low end for a winner? Like like he'll probably never listen to this podcast. So I would probably say that, you know, I think Fabio is in the contention to be maybe the worst winner of all time. So if like what's your Fabio score? Because I feel like for me, my Fabio score would be like maybe at so like the good thing, the strongest part of Fabio's game is the social game. And that is I think probably the most important part of Survivor, having played now. Like I would have said strategy before, but now I would say it's social. But he did nothing, I feel like, with his social agency at all. Like I don't think he really had any agency per se. He just had good social bonds. And so I would probably put him at like a 2.
Yeah.
Or 2
and this is like on the winner scale.
Yes.
Like I wouldn't necessarily say Fabio is a 2 player. But as a winner, just to help give like a more distinct range for winners. But yeah, it's tricky. I think that like I think you have to look at, or like I would look at, you know, I talk a lot about like the factors that go into rating during the season. They are like long-term prospects, short-term safety, and how they performed in the episode. I feel like ranking a winner or rating a winner, I would look at like long-term, like throw them on any season. How do they perform as a player? Like throw them on 1,000 seasons. How often do they win? Like that's something that when I look at, and a player like Fabio, I think does like decently on that, because as a young, good-looking guy who's pretty good socially and can win a lot of immunity challenges, he's probably going to luck into some wins here or there that some other people are going to like play themselves.
He's probably making the merge every time.
Right. So that's like that's probably where he performs best. But then I think you also have to look at like winning game, because you know, extrapolating is a very, you know, subjective thing to do. Granted, it's all subjective. And I think you have to look at like, okay, well, how likely was it that they won this game? Like, how did they put themselves in a position to win? Like Jesse puts himself in a spot where it's fire making and immunity. And so if you say he has a 1 in 4 chance at immunity and then a 50% chance at fire making, then he's got what, like a close to 40% chance to win the whole game. Whereas, you know, you put in like, and he's got that chance from the final like 6 on. Whereas if you look at Gabler from final 6, it's like he's relying on a bunch of other stuff. cut out the 40% from Jesse immediately. He's got 60%. Then you have to make sure that Carla doesn't win immunity there. And you got to make sure that, like this person gets over here, there. And then you got to make sure that you get put in fire. And it's like, you're looking at like the odds of Gabler winning much lower. And what did he do to change those things? Well, he crushed it at fire. So like, I'll give him credit for that. But Carla losing had nothing to do with him. So he really had to rely on fate for that. So like, that's the sort of like stuff that you want to start to look at. And I think Fabio is, to my memory, at least, it's been a while since I've rewatched that season. I remember like certainly he had to take his fate in his own hands in terms of like winning a bunch of immunities at the end, but also had to like rely on a lot of stuff happening around him that benefited him.
And he I don't think Fabio could win a modern day game of Survivor with the game he played in Nicaragua, because he got to the end and was basically part of no votes. And so I don't think that would necessarily go over super well, now, as opposed to what it was in 2010 or whatever, or whenever that was, 2011. But I think that he's probably, for me at least, the low end of that scale. But I feel like most winners are above 5. So then it's like, I don't see it necessarily as like a linear scale. So it's like very top heavy.
I mean, you'd expect that like if you won the game, you're probably...
Yeah, but even on a winner scale, I still feel like I tend to rate higher. But I think for me, Gabler is in the 4 to 6 range, probably. And I think I might just I'm going to maybe give a 5 or a 6.
Yeah.
That's where I'm leaning.
I think the main thing for me is like, if we could like really nail down, was the fire making thing the deciding factor? Because if it is, I think that is not a credit to Gabler's game.
Yes,
I mean, granted, he crushed it at fire making. Like, absolute kudos. Handed to him.
But he didn't put himself there.
But being put there,
and also because you're the lesser threat. Like
exactly.
It's not like the thing about Owen is like, I don't think it's fair to penalize him for not doing the fire thing, because he didn't get put into fire because he was the bigger threat between him and Gabler. So it's like not really a fair thing to do. But I think a lot of the jury, it seems like that's a big reason they're giving. And then the other one is he had the gusto to go after Ellie. But again, with the way he kind of went after Ellie, I'm like not really sure. I think it worked out, but does that mean it was like a genius move? Like, I'm not sure. I don't think so.
The Ellie thing is so weird to me. I would give credit to Gabler for like snowing Ellie in the pre-merge.
For sure.
I think those were some of his best moments. Like blurting out, "Hey, Ellie sucks. She should leave."
In front of Janine.
Yeah, like it pissed off his allies, and like it theoretically set some things in motion, but like those things could have happened without. Like he wasn't an essential part of that to my memory. And it didn't really help his game a ton to my eyes, beyond just like giving people an excuse to point to it. So like, maybe I can take that, but like if the two main reasons are he made fire and he got out Ellie, then I'm like, personally, I'm not seeing those.
I think I might be now leaning 4 or 5. I think I'll go with a 5 if I'm like was kind of torn. I'm gonna settle on a 5 because there are some things that just worked out for him, but like in 95% of cases, they would not have worked out, and it would have resulted in him going home or getting 0 votes at the end of the game. So I think that is kind of where, and I think that, if I had to like do a winner's ranking of like 43 seasons worth, I think he probably would be in the bottom 5 or 10.
I think I'm there too. Again, like there are ways that opinion for me could change, like if I learned different things. And like even if the jury said like, hey, the reason I voted for Gabler is because he broke a record in fire making,
right?
And like nobody expected that, and like that was super impressive. Like at least there, it's like he did that. Whereas he was in fire making because he lost a challenge, and then had to like fight for his life. And if anything goes wrong in that spot, he can be great at fire making, but like, hey, a gust of wind blows the wrong way and his kindling falls off, and now he's screwed, right? Like, it's still not the best place.
It's not what you want to hang your head on.
If that is your defining move, like that's not good.
Yeah, and I also should say, like, I don't want to be too harsh on him, and like everybody that wins deserves to win. And there's probably a lot of reasons that he got the votes that we were not shown and don't fully understand, which is we're trying to be very open about that. But if we are trying to like compare him to other winners of the history of the show, it is in good fun, but I probably would give him a 5, and he would probably be in the bottom 5 or 10 of winners of all time.
Yeah. So yeah, I think for me, my instinct is to go one lower and go with a 4 for Gabler, which is entirely and like again, I was open to it during the season when I said I could be completely wrong about this. I could still be completely wrong about this. It's entirely colored by my own interpretation and perspective on what I saw in the edit. And I'm sure there are people on the jury that would disagree with me, and they have a better view of it than I do, certainly. But there are also perhaps at least one person on the jury that would agree with me. Who knows? So
yeah, that's true. James is sitting pretty right now.
Yeah.
But I think he also he did some really bad stuff early, especially early on, and then he did some good stuff. And so
how many winners have played Survivor and said, please vote me out, I'm going to use my shot in the dark?
Right.
That alone for me is is that even worth middling,
Right. Yeah, I know. That's definitely fair. But you know what? On the other hand, I guess to play the devil's advocate to that is, going out onto Survivor, you are used to the comforts of your life, and you have an idea of how you think you're going to play. And then you get out there, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, some people have never, I guess Gabler's probably camped before, but some people have never been in those depleted situations where you can really, things can happen that you never would expect them. You may react in certain ways that you would have never expected. And we've seen the history of the show. Sometimes some of the greatest players have hiccups early on that, it's like they're a different person. So Kathy Vavrick O'Brien ended up being one of the best players of all time, played one of the best losing games of Survivor ever, especially in the era that it was in. She was a game changer. She is, making new plans and new alliances at tribal council. She's not afraid to flip on her alliance when they're putting her at the bottom. She revolutionized the game and probably played the best of anybody that season, but she started off so bad. And then same with Holly Hoffman, she played really well too. She threw the alligabler shoes in the ocean. So I think that sometimes people have these moments where they don't act all there, and then if they can they rally from that? I guess is the question.
It's very fair. All right. Well, I think we've done it then. I think we've done our best. We've tried.
Yes.
And I think I just came up with it on the spot, but I like the range idea, because especially on Survivor, where it's we're having to make these ratings based on just an interpretation of something. I genuinely do think that based on what we saw, it could be as high as a 7 or even maybe an 8.
Yeah.
And my rating of a 4 is out of ignorance. It's I don't know for sure, and so I'm making my best guess at what I think. That's
statistics, brother. That's like your two-tailed t-test or whatever.
And hey, if anything, maybe this is just even more of a testament to how good Gabler is at convincing people that he's not a threat.
That's true. That's true. He'll be the next 2-time winner. That's for sure.
All right. Well, any other thoughts about the season?
No, I think that, a lot of people have been kind of down on it, but I thought it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. And I think that the cast was very likable. I didn't really get all of the negativity surrounding it, because I thought it was pretty good, but
yeah, I think that it's probably my least favorite of the new era so far.
Okay, interesting. So even 41, right?
I know some people didn't. I liked 41. I thought it was kind of fun. I liked Erica as a winner. I think they definitely did her a
Oh,
disservice.
certainly did. Erica's
But
extremely charming if you've ever met her. Like she's like
I
I
have
can
not.
totally
She did a
see.
cameo for me once, but
Oh, right. Yeah, she did. Yeah, she was your or she was in your draft, right?
yeah,
So,
she was my winner pick, my first pick. Yeah,
ooh, first pick. There you
first
go.
picked on the whole board, I think.
Yeah. I think 41 was pretty like people were also kind of harsh on it too, but I thought it was pretty good. It's just it felt like very heavy at times in terms of like it looked like people weren't having a lot of fun. And so I think that I thought people looked like they were having more fun on this season than that season.
That's fair. I liked the novelty of the new kind of techniques that they were using in the
Yeah,
edit
yeah,
and in the show. They definitely went overboard on advantages, but I at least even though like Erica was a very surprising winner that they did a disservice to, it still felt like the overall narrative of the season felt clear to
it
me
was
with
clear.
like
Yeah, yeah,
Card
yeah,
and Deshaun and like everything that happened between them strategically all
yeah,
tracked and follow it.
yeah,
And so like I followed all of that, even though I was
yeah.
like, wait, Erica, how?
Right.
At least I followed the other stuff. So what
Yeah,
this season I'm like, wait, Gabler, how?
yeah,
I don't have the other stuff to fall back on because I'm like, I know there's like a little arc for Jesse, but
yeah,
like beyond that, I have no
yeah.
idea. I have no idea how we got there. Um,
Yeah, and I think the other thing I liked about this season too, though, compared to like a season like 41 or Ghost Island, even was that there was an even spread of who lost the immunity challenge. Whereas, so I felt like by the time we got to the merge, at least we got to see like a decent amount of all three tribes
mm,
on this season. Whereas, Luvu was very much invisible for the most part, and they made up the majority of the end game. So I found that
mhm.
that kind of sucked to see. Like we wanted to kind of see more even distribution, but when one tribe loses everything, like it is going to be uneven. And so, yeah, I think I really like the seasons where there is a more even spread of who goes to tribal early.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is not just because you're here, but I think 42 is the pick for new era season. I
Oh,
mean,
that's
it's
so
look,
sweet.
there's only 3 so far, but
Yeah,
that's I
there
think
is
that was
only
the
three.
I think that one wins for me, and I think 41 would be second place, or 41 would be second place, and 43 would be third place.
I was actually a little bit
So,
surprised that people liked our season so much. I mean, I think it was obviously unbiased, but I quite liked it. But it's like we didn't like have a lot of live tribal or things like which people I guess don't really love. But I
look,
felt like it was a
I think
little bit more
people have
predictable, but at
yeah, I
times,
think people have learned to take live tribals over analogy tribals. So
right, right, right. That's true. Well, we had a lot of analogy tribals too, so and nobody said anything. But I agree. I actually always thought that tribal council was a waste of time. And when it started becoming live, I was like, okay, now it's actually interesting because it might change the game. And then they start to tell the stories of live tribals a bit better. But I think there was a reason they were like 3 or 4 minutes in the early seasons, and they should have stuck with that.
yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah. But thank
Um,
you so much for having me. This was so
Thank you for
fun.
being here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think overall, like, there are some very high moments from this season. I think the 3 episode Jesse's streak was really
Yeah.
fun. That concludes with the betrayal of Cody. I think that's a really high point. I was trying to
The
think of
reveal
like,
of the idol and Janine's face.
yeah, yes. I was trying to think of like what will I remember the season for? And ultimately, I think the thing I will remember it most for is Gabler winning and how surprising that was to me. And then the second thing would be like the Cody move, but because Jesse didn't win and because the winner was so surprising, I feel like that might get a little bit lost to time.
Right.
Unless Jesse comes back, right? And like
Right.
other things happen.
Right.
Uh, because ultimately it was just kind of like one, and it that's the thing too, it feels isolated from the rest of the season to me. Like it doesn't feel like there was
Okay.
a huge build up to that moment.
Right.
It felt like
Right.
there was a little like 3 episode arc maybe.
Right.
But a lot of the stuff felt like just like individual little pockets of stories, and I didn't know how we got there every time.
Right. See, I
um
think that Gabler actually winning made the season better in my eyes because I don't know.
Interesting.
I'm always so I people had said to me like, oh, like, do you like watching yourself on TV? And I was like, to be honest, I mean, it was weird, but like I never root for like my well, I guess that's not true because I really, really enjoyed Jesse and Carla this season too. But I generally, before I went on the show, didn't really root for my like archetype at all. Like, I really liked the like entertaining people, and I thought that an unpredictable finish is like the best thing. That's like, I hated when Edgic was right, you know, because I was like, ugh, whatever, it's so boring. But like, that's why Gabon I thought is one of my favorite seasons. Like, that's so fun to watch. Whereas I didn't, you know, 17 and 18, they were back to back, and I didn't really like Token Jeans because it was so predictable. And even though that, you know, first unanimous winner like played a really great game, all of that, I was like, whatever, it's kind of boring. So I like when stuff like that happens and like goes completely AWOL. And so I loved this ending, even though it was crazy.
I do, and yeah, I think again, going back to the beginning of this podcast, I do like that this as a reminder to players to never underestimate anybody in the game. Which is something that, you know, talking about Big Brother Canada winner recently, one of their catchphrases in the game was like, you know, every single person is valuable in this game and has value and is here to play, and do not underestimate a single person, which is funny because they ultimately underestimate that person. But I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's crucial. You can't ever look at somebody and just be like, yeah, obvious GOAT. It just, you know, sometimes it's true, but you never know. And so I think adding that uncertainty is good.
I think especially in New Age Survivor, where they only cast, like, they don't cast, I think they used to cast people that were like, you know, kind of fodder, or just characters, or they didn't know the show very well. But for the most part, they're casting people that really know the show well, and and from what I understand, based on, you know, our pep talk before the season started by Sir Jeffrey, was that they are trying to only cast people that can win, and like that everybody believes in. Like, if anybody in the casting crew like doesn't think that you're gonna do well, or like don't have a chance to get far in the game or play, then, you know, it has to be unanimous now. It's not like I have a good feeling but everybody else thinks you suck, like we're gonna take a chance on you. So I think that with that too, like, you really can't underestimate anybody, because those big characters, they probably have more going on than they're leading on.
Yeah. All right, well, that's what we have for you then. That is a wrap on season 43 of Survivor. Well, you know, let us know your thoughts. It's where you fall on the spectrum, the range of ratings for Gabler. Hey, maybe you agree with the range, but you think it's the upper end, or maybe you think the range is dumb, and that I should make fire.
Who do you think would win fire between us?
Probably you. I mean, you've played Survivor.
Right.
I imagine you've made some fire in
okay,
your time.
So next time, if I ever see you in my life, I'll bring a flint and we'll have a competition.
Okay. All right. I'll have to. I'll secretly practice and then blow your mind.
Okay, sounds good. Deal.
Not really, though. Not really.
Don't be like Lydia and practice it in a pizza box in your apartment.
That doesn't seem very advisable. All right, Omar, where can people find you if they want to keep aware of your doings?
So I mean, Elon didn't shut down Twitter yet, but Gabler almost did, and that we survived that too. So you can find me on Twitter, Omar Zaheer DVM. I like to tweet about Survivor and Big Brother. And then also Instagram, OZaheer24. But other than that, I'm just, you know, being a vet, whatever.
All right. All right. You can, of course, find me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Taran Armstrong. The Survivor season is over, but I am going to continue to do some watch parties on Wednesdays. There's a very fun show on YouTube called Jet Lag the Game. It's kind of like The Amazing Race, but more fun. So come and watch that with me. It's a good time. And also, of course, The Circle is going to be starting soon in just a couple of weeks. I'll be watching that on Twitch as well if you want to watch those along with me. And we'll also have some podcast coverage for it as that comes up. We're going to be doing some like Big Brother end of the year coverage, some post-show recap stuff coming up. We've got this Traders show with Cerise on it. That's very exciting. And I'll be talking and watching all of this stuff over on the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Taran Armstrong. And you can find all of the stuff I'm doing over on Twitter as well, @Armstrong Taran. And I think that's about what we have for Survivor. So thank you all so much for joining me all season long. We've made it through. We've rated all of the players. Someday, maybe we'll be able to get an actual game going from it when the website can work. But until then, we will continue to just rate into the void. And you can find more of those void ratings next season on Survivor 44, whenever that starts. I don't remember if that was announced, but probably sometime whenever those usually start.
March 1st.
There you go. Big Brother Canada timing. Yeah.
Yes, true that.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us all season long. And you know, be an alligator.
Alligator kind of came up to the surface.
All right. We'll see you next season.
Bye.